Hey guys. This is part 4 of What If Naruto Was in Transformers. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 16. He doesn't know if he's asleep or awake. He hears voices, he does, heavy footsteps, blurred and dark words, a horrible screeching sound, more footsteps but lighter this time, Naruto's distant yet distinct voice shouting at him. He tries so very hard to reply, but he doesn't know whether he succeeds or not. And by that time it's already quiet again, and dark, and he must have just imagined it all. At least there is no pain, for whatever reason. He thinks there should be. He has a feeling there was something going on. Something bad, but his thoughts are scattered and slow, like they are stained with oceans of tar that keeps them at bay, struggling to connect anything. He hears more sounds, multiple ones. Some of them are quiet, some of them loud, and they all form a big complicated mess in his head. In the end it's all quiet again, and he doesn't know if it has been seconds or centuries, and maybe he really has just thought everything up. Then he wakes up. The first thing Kakashi was aware of was the pain. There was a throbbing ache all over his body, pulsing in his arms and chest and everywhere. He was thirsty, and his head was pounding and he felt miserable all over. For a moment he would have really liked to succumb back to the darkness he had surfaced from. At least there had been some form of peace, even if it had been a bit frightening. He tried to turn his head and to his surprise found out he could. He was lying on something relatively soft and warm. His mask was still in place, he could feel it, and that was a good thing at least. He blinked open his eye, the Sharingan was covered. A good thing number 2. Everything was blurred and bright, and the shapes and lights seemed to be swimming back and forth in his vision. He tried to say something, but only an ugly croak came out, like his throat hadn't anticipated the sudden reuse of his vocal cords. There was a gasp and then a sound of running footsteps. A hazy figure appeared at his side, with spiked messy hair. "Kakashi-sensei?" he thought the figure said, worried yet hopeful, voice trembling with emotion and energy. "Obito?" Kakashi thought blearily, his mind still sluggish. "Who?" the figure said. No, it couldn't be Obito. Why would he call him sensei? Unless it was as a joke, but it hadn't come out with a tone that would have indicated joking, so it couldn't have been Obito. Also, Obito was dead. Kakashi blinked, and blinked some more. His vision was slowly beginning to clear out. The ceiling light came to a focus, and the high ceiling itself, and some of the walls, and lastly Naruto, who was hovering at the side of what appeared to be some sort of hospital bed. Oh, he thought. Right. The base, the good robots, the bad robots, Naruto. Sensei? Naruto. Alive, he stared at his student stupidly. "Sensei, can you hear me? Do you need something? Does it hurt? How many fingers?" There was a frown appearing on Naruto's face, and the boy leaned even further over him, thrusting one hand at his face with 3 fingers up. "Calm down, Naruto," the Jounin muttered. "I'll survive." "Sorry, sensei," Naruto said sheepishly, retracting his hand to run it through his messy hair. "But you look like hell, so say if you want something." "Well, that's how I feel too." He felt a peculiar cool pressure on his aching arms. He tilted his head to look down at his body. His arms were covered in towels wrapped over something cool, ice, and he had lost his Jounin vest and shirt, and was wearing a gray shirt much too large for him. He could see a part of a bandage wrapped around his chest from under the collar. So there must have been someone here to patch him up, someone human, because there was no way any of the Autobots could have done work this precise. He felt still a bit disoriented and realized he had no idea about the time. "How long was I on the Nemesis? And unconscious?" "It just turned Saturday," Naruto replied. "You were captured for about a half a day and slept for a couple of hours in here." "Oh, I see." He closed his eye for a while and rested it back against the pillows. After a moment he opened it again, and returned his gaze to his student. The boy was leaning his arms against the edge of the bed, watching him like a hawk. "You really okay, sensei?" "I will be," Kakashi assured. "Are you okay?" "Me?" Naruto seemed surprised. "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? Maybe because the last thing I remember from the battlefield is you having your arm being slashed off and nearly being squashed under a giant robot." "Don't worry about me, sensei, I'm fine," Naruto assured. "I managed to fight them off." The boy carried on quietly before falling silent. Naruto was a terrible liar, Kakashi thought as Megatron's words from their first meeting drifted back to his mind. There was no way the Decepticon leader would have known about it unless he had seen it for himself. Naruto must have seen his thoughts because he turned his head away, eyes cast down. Is everyone else okay? Kakashi asked carefully and mentally winced as he realized how much his words sounded like did the fox hurt anyone of ours. Naruto's eyes snapped back to his and the boy nodded vigorously, his voice almost harsh as he replied. Yes, everyone's fine. RC took some damage from the rescue mission but the doc patched her up again. RC had been with Naruto aboard the Nemesis. The thought was quickly followed by the very obvious conclusion his mind has been avoiding before that moment. Wait, Naruto was aboard the Nemesis? Kakashi tried to raise himself up a bit. And speaking of that, what the hell were you doing, running off to the enemy flagship? You could have been captured too, or killed. His student was a capable ninja, despite some lingering childish foolishness and boisterousness. But it was never clever to run into the enemy headquarters, especially if the enemies were something you had minimal experience fighting against. And giant robots. Naruto's brow furrowed and he crossed his arms, chin lifting in challenge. Saving your ass, of course, after you decided to faint in the middle of a fight. I was in that fight only because you couldn't be careful enough and stay in the base. For a moment Naruto looked even angrier, opening his mouth and clearly preparing to reply something in kind. But nothing came out, and after a few seconds his student seemed to deflate, his shoulders sagging and his whole demeanor changing into a more timid, anguished one. The change was so abrupt and uncharacteristic that at first Kakashi could only stare in shock as Naruto started to babble. Yeah, I know, sensei. I really screwed up and I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of that to happen. I just wanted to be outside for a while. I was becoming crazy in this place and I didn't think it. Naruto, take it easy, will you? Kakashi finally managed to cut through the rambling. He felt bad about speaking so harshly to his student. Naruto had acted most thoughtlessly and endangered them both, and seemingly the Autobots too if the fox had truly surfaced again. But he himself had been careless too, using his unusually limited chakra so quickly and not realizing how taxing it was for him in this world. Another thing to discuss with Ratchet, he made a mental note. Naruto quickly closed his mouth, still looking miserable. Kakashi sighed. He should have realized, he thought, that Naruto would have done something like that after being cooped up indoors for so long without even a glimpse of the new world outside. It's okay, really, he said. You shouldn't have done it. It was dangerous for us both and terribly careless and selfish, but I understand why you did it, and I should have seen it coming long ago. Just don't do it again. Naruto nodded vigorously again. I won't, sensei, I promise. The boy fell silent again before lifting his chin again, some of the earlier challenge filling his eyes once more. Though, I promise you nothing about not coming to rescue you the next time you get your ass kicked, sensei. That's non-negotiable, Kakashi chuckled wearily. That's okay, Naruto. I would have done the same thing too. Naruto's smile was nearly blinding in its radiance. At that moment the Jounin heard footsteps nearing and saw a woman he'd never seen before walking up to him. She had dark hair and sharp eyes, and for some reason seemed a bit familiar to him. We'll talk more about the fight later, he said to Naruto, who became more somber again and nodded, taking a small step back to let the woman see the Jounin properly. Good, you are awake, the woman said, but apparently she didn't really expect him to reply as she began curtly yet carefully unwrapping his right arm from under the cool towels and checking the bruised skin under them. Oh, right, from the chains, Kakashi thought calmly while inspecting his own injuries. At least his arms and shoulders didn't hurt as much as they could have, under the circumstances. The woman, clearly the human medic he had been anticipating, apparently knew how to do her job. She eyed critically his injuries. Behind her, Kakashi saw, Naruto stood and watched his bruised arms, the boy's brow furrowed and lips thin. The woman was muttering to herself, taking small transparent bags filled with something blue from inside the towels and putting them into a plastic bag she had brought with her. She then circled around the bed to do the same to his other arm. Naruto? Kakashi asked. The boy's eyes snapped to meet his. Could you please get the Autobots here? Sure thing, sensei. And the youth took off with his new task. The woman had removed the cool packs around his left arm too, and then finished by checking the bandages over his chest. Apparently she was satisfied by his healing process, as she nodded to herself. Who are you? Kakashi asked as it became clear the woman wasn't going to speak to him without being prompted. He struggled slightly over the unfamiliar English sounds but managed to get everything out with what he thought was rather a passable pronunciation. The medic startled, her eyes widening in surprise before slight embarrassment crept into them. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't know you spoke any English. Kakashi understood mostly what she said, and fortunately she spoke quite clearly and not too fast. "I speak a little," Kakashi said, and would have shrugged if his shoulders didn't hurt quite so much. "I should have introduced myself right at the beginning. That was very unprofessional of me." The woman berated herself, before straightening a bit. "My name is June Darby. I believe you know my son Jack." Oh, that explained the slight familiarity. Kakashi nodded in greeting. "My name is Hatake Kakashi. Nice to meet you. You are a doctor?" The woman smiled thinly. "A nurse, I see. Thank you for everything," Kakashi said as his limited vocabulary slightly failed him. "Just doing my job. The others are here," she said, and backed off to make room for the approaching Autobots. The children were there too, though they stayed back, carefully watching him from beside Bumblebee. Kakashi turned his head to look Optimus Prime in the eyes as the Autobot leader came to a stop beside the hospital bed. "Morning," Kakashi said, and under other circumstances would have waved his hand in greeting. "Hatake-san," Prime replied. "It is good to see you awake and well." "It's good to be awake and relatively well again. I'll take the kids home now that they know he'll be fine," Mrs. Darby said. "It's been a rough day for them too, and they must get to bed." She left quickly after that, hauling the children with her. Miko was waving furiously at Kakashi, and the shinobi smiled a bit under the mask. Then he yawned. "Though I just spoke of being awake, I fear it won't continue for long." Prime seemed to smile, just a bit. "Yes, I believe Mrs. Darby will be displeased if you won't rest well, Hatake-san. We can talk more later, when you are feeling better once more." Kakashi nodded and had to say just one more thing. "I'm sorry for all the trouble we have caused. I know you must have taken great risks to aid us and save me, and we owe you for that." Naruto was nodding vigorously at his words, blue eyes bright. Optimus Prime smiled ever so slightly. "It's an honor to help a friend, Hatake-san. There is no debt here." Wow, Kakashi was beginning to feel a bit bad for keeping all those secrets from the Autobots. Well, it hadn't really been a matter of choice but only a logical way to deal with new acquaintances, he thought as he watched the Autobots retreat again, every one of them looking happy to see him awake. Even RC looked relieved, Kakashi thought with a small amount of surprise. He then felt a bit guilty about his thoughts. RC had, after all, fought with him to save Naruto, and has apparently aided his student in the rescue mission. Finally only Naruto remained, standing once more right beside the bed. He now had a glass of water in his hands and helped Kakashi to drink some of it. "I probably won't stay awake for long," Kakashi said, his eyes closed and feeling his mind begin to drift. "It's alright, sensei," he heard Naruto say. "Sleep well." Kakashi grunted in response but had no strength to answer anything else. Before he succumbed to sleep he felt Naruto's hand carefully pat his leg, where there were no bandages or injuries, and heard the sound of swiftly retreating footsteps. Naruto was nervous. He didn't feel like that often, not really. Not in this scale, at least. But now there was a twisting feeling in his stomach, like something was slowly curling around his intestines and tightening its hold with every passing moment. By the morning, he was feeling sick from it. Kakashi-sensei had woken up again a while ago, and currently the Jounin was sitting up and was critically eyeing a piece of buttered white bread he had been offered as breakfast. Though he still was pale and weary-looking, in general he seemed to be in a much better condition than the first time he had woken up. Naruto was relieved beyond measure, though in the end Kakashi-sensei hadn't been unconscious for long. He had still been out of it long enough for Naruto to imagine all sorts of horrible scenarios, most of them including his teacher just never waking up again. And now that his sensei was awake and feeling better, Naruto knew the discussions about the demon fox wouldn't be far ahead. He dreaded that conversation. Though he knew he couldn't have done much to stop it, he still felt a gnawing guilt in his heart about the incident in the battlefield. Because this time the QB hadn't surfaced because of an important mission, he had gotten himself in that desperate situation all because of his own stupidity. He could have gone full QB mode. He could have attacked the Autobots. Naruto didn't know what he would do if he someday came to just to find out he had hurt some of his friends. Or worse, the beast of guilt grew stronger inside him, tightening its hold. Naruto resisted the urge to wrap his arms around his stomach to ease the horrible feeling. Kakashi-sensei suspected something had happened in the battlefield, but he didn't know all of it. Naruto didn't know what to do if his sensei looked at him with disappointment and anger after hearing that there had been a very great possibility that he would have next charged at RC and wheeled Jack if he fortunately hadn't come to just at that very moment. Miko, Jack and Raph weren't yet at the base. Naruto suspected Mrs. Darby hadn't let them. Maybe Jack's mother knew there were grave things the Autobots had to talk with them, or she didn't just want to let the kids back so soon after the whole bloody ordeal. So now they would probably have to talk about the demon fox stuff. And Kakashi-sensei didn't even yet know how much he had told the robots about their shinobi abilities. One more thing he had to hope Sensei wouldn't be too angry at him about. His gaze drifted over the base. Ratchet was beside his beloved computer screens and speaking with Optimus. Wheeljack, along with Bulkhead and Bumblebee, had disappeared somewhere an hour ago or so, but they'd probably be back soon. It had been heavily implied that there would be some serious talk happening in the base after Kakashi-sensei felt a bit more stronger, but before the kids came back to the base, Naruto sighed, kicking at the floor. There'd be no escaping it. On the other hand, it was better this way. If he had to suffer through explaining the QB incident to his mentor, he would do so quickly. Like ripping off a plaster. The quicker, the better, and so on. You okay? Naruto didn't jump at RC's sudden words as he had heard the heavy steps of the approaching bot ages ago. Sure, he replied, eyes now again on Kakashi-sensei, who had apparently eaten the bread and was now carefully smelling a weird fruit of some sort. I want to get the talking about nasty things part over as soon as possible. From the corner of his eye he saw RC nodding slowly. It'll be fine, she said after a moment, kneeling down and putting a servo gently on the boy's shoulder. Naruto smiled, although a bit mirthlessly. I really hope so. It's not really nice to tell your teacher you nearly maimed your friends because of your own stupidity, but Wheeljack and I are fine. And you didn't attack us. Not really the point. I think that's absolutely the point, Naruto sighed. The point is more in what could have happened because of me running off. RC sighed and stood back up. I know you think so. But lots of things could always happen because of everything. It's not good to dwell too much on the ones that didn't. Just learn from them, and move on. The robot was silent for a moment. It is quite enough to mull over the ones that did happen. Naruto turned to look at RC, but the small Autobot didn't have her eyes on him, but as Naruto earlier, had them on the copy Nin, who had by now finished his breakfast and was adjusting his mask back to its place. Yeah, he said. Guess you're right, RC snorted. Of course I'm right. Kakashi-sensei lifted his head and caught the blonde boy and the blue Autobot both looking at him, and answered to their gazes with raising his eyebrow in question. Naruto laughed a bit then, and jogged to the hospital bed to speak with his teacher. He heard RC following him not far behind. How are you feeling, Sensei? Quite well, all in all. I can even move my hands a bit. He demonstrated by a small wave with his right arm, while Naruto eyed the injuries with distrust. The bruises had slowly started to change color, and didn't look at all better than earlier. If only Sakura-chan was here. She could have eased the sensei's injuries a bit with the healing chakra. But she was far, far away in both time and space, and could not help them in any way. You sure? 'Cause they don't look that much better. Sensei rolled his eye. Yes, I am quite sure that they aren't aching as much as earlier, Naruto. I'll be fine. The Jounin then raised his eyebrow at Naruto. And what about your injuries? Naruto tugged up his sleeve and shoved his teacher the skin with barely a mark of the earlier wound. It's just as new, Sensei. Barely a scratch there anymore. At least there's some use from the fox, right? He could briefly see relief flashing in the Jounin eye before the emotion flickered away. Right. Kakashi-sensei's eyes then moved to RC. Good to see you're not dead to the world anymore, Hataki, Sensei snorted. The feeling is mutual, RC-san. I heard you two took part in the rescue mission. RC's blue eyes twinkled. I did have something to do with it. Naruto could see Kakashi-sensei smile briefly behind the mask. I should thank you, then, for aiding me and watching Naruto's back on the nemesis. He was rather able to watch his back himself, I think, Sensei chuckled. That he is. Still, everyone needs someone to watch their back. Naruto thought there was sort of a sad look in RC's eyes for a moment, but it quickly passed. Then he remembered something that had earlier caught his attention but had as quickly left his mind at the time, in the face of much more urgent things. Who's Obito, Sensei? What? His teacher was looking at him with his lone eye wide and shocked. Where did you hear that from? You said it to me. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. When you were waking up for the first time, you said Obito. Kakashi's brow was furrowed and Naruto could not read the expression on his teacher's face. Well, on the 1/3 of the face that was visible. No, I said Naruto. You didn't. You definitely said Obito. They have the same ending, you just heard wrong. The Jounin's voice was becoming a bit short-tempered. Naruto was about to keep on arguing when RC abruptly shifted beside him. The others are coming, she said. We'll talk soon, crap. He had nearly forgotten about it in the middle of all the bantering. So he had to abandon the thought of what the hell was that about. That had risen to his mind to focus on the matter at hand again. He'd pester Sensei about the name later. There was a sound of roaring engines, and soon a green truck and 2 cars, one white, the other yellow, came to a stop in the middle of the base. The rest of the Autobots had returned then. It wasn't long until all of the robots had gathered around them. Optimus Prime had his serious face on, and Naruto sighed. Let's get this over with then. Naruto hopped up to sit at the end of the bed beside Kakashi-sensei's feet and crossed his arms, trying to make it look so he didn't feel like a child about to be scolded. Kakashi-sensei seemed to straighten his back, and even with his pallor and very un-ninja-like clothes and bandages, he somehow gathered an aura of a soldier around him. Sensei looked Naruto in the eyes and asked, "So, did you tell them the whole story?" Naruto nodded. "Most of it." RC's gaze was moving between the two ninjas. "So you know about the recent beast problem?" "An educated guess," Kakashi-sensei said dryly. "And Naruto apparently told you the gist of it." "Yes, we know the basics about the demon," Prime said gravely. The Autobots around them shifted and glanced at each other. The group was clearly still shaken about that small piece of information, Naruto thought glumly. Well, he couldn't really judge them for that. "Well, that's good then." Kakashi-sensei turned his gaze back to Naruto. "So what happened?" Naruto said. Like a plaster, he thought. "Well, after you killed that con, you passed out. Like right away. I couldn't get you to wake up. And then there were more flyers and—" He quieted down for a moment, and still without looking his mentor in the eye carried on. "I couldn't move my arm, and you were out cold, Sensei, and the things were about to attack, so—" He shrugged. "Well, that's the last thing I remember properly." He fiddled his fingers and looked down at his hands as they were the most interesting thing he'd seen in a long time. "RC and I got there sometime after that," Wheeljack continued quietly. "And the kid was there, apparently on good way along the road to full Fox mode. He had fought off the remaining flyers." Naruto could feel the eyes of the white bot on his neck. "Sorry, kiddo, but for a moment I thought you were going to attack us." "It's okay," Naruto said, glancing at Wheeljack quickly, going for a sheepish smile. "I probably would have, but you didn't," Sensei said calmly. Then he asked, his voice a bit curious. "Probably would have, unless what?" "Well," Naruto said, "I noticed you were gone, and sort of just came back." Kakashi-sensei blinked at him. Then he hemmed and nodded thoughtfully. "Anyway," Naruto continued quickly, "I don't think the Kyuubi was as strong as before. It should have had recovered more by that time, I think." He shrugged again. "So, I was just lucky, mostly." Kakashi-sensei looked even more thoughtful. "Naruto did say there was something you could do to stop the demon from advancing and force it back, once it surfaced, Hataki-san," Prime said. "There is." Kakashi-sensei glanced around. "Where is my vest?" RC walked to the edge of the room and bent to pick up the green vest from beside the base wall and brought it to the hospital bed. Kakashi-sensei, looking rather relieved to see his Jounin vest again, quickly delved into its many pockets. Before too long he had fished up a piece of paper, much like an explosion tag. "I can stop the process with this," the Jounin said. "I just need to get close enough." Wheeljack let out an incredulous scoff. "You can stop it with a piece of paper?" Naruto smirked at that. "Wait till you see the ones that explode." Kakashi-sensei was shaking his head, ignoring Wheeljack's look, growing even more incredulous. Or maybe his interest had been piqued at the explode word. Robots were difficult beings to read after all. "It can be done. It's just crucial I am there for it." He met Naruto's eyes. "Naruto cannot control it, not really. Nothing the demon fox does is his to decide." Naruto kicked at the air gloomily. "It sucks. Most things do, kid," Wheeljack said. "At least that doesn't happen too often, right?" "Right. Speaking of unpleasant things, there is also other thing you must know about." Kakashi-sensei was looking more serious than Naruto had seen in a long time. "Megatron knows about the demon too." "He what?" Naruto shouted, twisting to face his teacher and nearly losing his balance on the bed as a result. The guilty feeling that had nearly disappeared altogether along with the conversation was now replaced by sheer horror and disbelief. How the hell is that possible?" Sensei met his shocked gaze. "He taunted me with it. He had somehow seen it himself." "There's no way he saw that," Wheeljack argued. "We would have known if he was at the battlefield. He wouldn't have had to be there himself to see it," RC said. "It's enough that Soundwave was." Ratchet shook his head, shocked. "He recorded it." Naruto felt a bit hollow inside. "So he saw the whole thing?" That was absolutely not a good thing. It was bad enough the Autobots knew about it. Megatron, on the other hand, he thought about the cargo bay of the Nemesis, about the red eyes that had regarded him with only malice in them. There had been something off about the situation, he had thought fleetingly. Now he knew why. Megatron had then already known that there was a potential raging monster caged inside him. He has plans, Kakashi-sensei said, and his voice brought Naruto back from his thoughts. He heavily implied on it. He will try something to get to Naruto and to the fox, only to cause havoc. Optimus nodded grimly. We must do everything in our power to stop that from happening. The Autobot leader turned his gaze to Ratchet. They need to get home. We need to get them home. Chapter 17. So what you are saying is that there is some power missing? Ratchet had a thoughtful frown on his metallic face, arms crossed pensively as he carefully listened to Kakashi's every word. The copy nodded. I know my limits and I know my recovery speed. I don't have a great deal of chakra, but I certainly have enough to carry out a bit of fighting after a week of rest and recovery. I should have had more chakra by the fight with the Decepticons. I was weaker than I should have been and it took me by surprise, hence the whole captured ordeal. He was sitting up on the bed, finally back in his proper ninja clothes. It felt nearly ridiculously good to be once more wearing the sandals, rather miraculously still in his possession. The Jounin trousers and a long-sleeved black shirt that greatly resembled his Jounin shirt, that had been rendered useless by Mrs. Darby, who had pretty much cut it to pieces when tending to his wounds. Still, it was much better than the horrible big gray one that had been more like a pajama than a proper shirt, or a tent. Anyway, he was in the middle of an important conversation here, and it was no place to reminiscence old pieces of clothing. And something Naruto said only verified it. He spoke of the Kyuubi, and how he was lucky to snap out of it because he noticed I was gone and because the demon apparently wasn't recovered as much as it should have been. Ratchet was nodding slowly. So both of you should have recovered by that time, but neither had the chakra that you should have had. That can't be a coincidence. No, it cannot. Naruto just didn't notice it as easily in the battle because he has much more chakra to begin with. Well, could it be that it's just recovering more slowly? Kakashi shook his head. I don't know why it would be like that. Chakra is produced within the body, and we are rather well, so there would be no reason for that. Ratchet hummed pensively. So some of your chakra is missing? Yes. What an uncomfortable thought. Kakashi frowned. Chakra was their very life force. It was very worrying to have a part of it just disappear. Could it be because of the attack you were trying to stop that then led you here? Kakashi lifted his eyebrow. So Naruto did tell you about that. He told about the chakra, yes. And the techniques you use. And your eye? The medic was smiling lopsidedly. We must discuss about those more, Kakashi-san, if you are fine with that. As a scientist, there is just too much new information for me to ignore. The copy chuckled a bit wearily. Sure thing. He was a bit proud of Naruto for managing to explain something as foreign as chakra to the Autobots. And he couldn't even bring himself to be annoyed with his student's decision to come clean about their ninja secrets. It wasn't like there was much room for secrecy anymore. The Autobots had been doing everything in their power to aid him and his student. He could at least be honest with them in return. But to answer your question, no, I don't think it was it. I cannot be sure, of course, as I don't know exactly what kind of attack it was. I certainly hope it wasn't the type to reduce our chakra permanently. He shuddered at the thought before shaking his head. No, it couldn't have been that. He would have heard of such technique before if it was, and certainly wouldn't have had it thrown at his face by some unknown mediocre jounin in the middle of nowhere. Well, we'll have to think about that later. Ratchet mused. Then to other things, what do you think caused you to get here in the first place? Kakashi ran a hand through his hair, leaving it even messier than usual, if possible. I really don't know. I didn't even know that the Sharingan was capable of this sort of thing. The Kamui technique is able to teleport objects into a different dimension, but I hadn't imagined things like traveling into different dimensions with different worlds could be done. Well, I would dare to say that most of what we are capable of holds much more potential than we could ever imagine, Ratchet said. Great and terrible things can be achieved when the limits we have thought as unbreakable are breached. I think this is the case with humankind here, there in your world, as well as with my own race. Kakashi nodded solemnly. If the incident could be replicated and used, only Kami knew what would happen then. So it doesn't have to be a solid theory, Ratchet said, shrugging. Just what do you think happened? Well, guess he'd really have to go by gut feeling then. I cannot be sure, of course, but I have some suspicions. He shifted a bit, taking a better position on the bed. It could have been an experimental technique that didn't quite work as it should have, Or just worked unexpectedly when encountering the Sharingan. Maybe when I tried to get rid of it with my Kamui it reacted and amplified the teleportation to the point that it snatched Naruto and me with it, as we were the closest ones to it, and brought us very much farther than it should have. Then, on the way, so to speak, its power burned through and out. Along with your powers, Ratchet said in understanding. It's well possible, at least it seems to me. Of course I don't know much about the theory of chakra or its uses, Kakashi shrugged. Well, it's just a thought. There's very little we can actually do to verify it, apart from finding out what that jutsu was. I didn't see the Jounin cast it, so I cannot copy it. And maybe knowing it wouldn't really help us at all anyway, Ratchet nodded. I understand. I think that your appearance here was a rather large stroke of luck and coincidence, if you hadn't heard of such things happening before. I doubt we should just try to recreate the coincidence and instead work a different route for you to return through. There may well be other channels to your dimension. Hopefully you're right. Kakashi massaged his temples with one hand, frowning. I think the foreign technique probably had more to do with making my Kamui unpredictable than bringing in much force of its own. Naruto has vast reserves of chakra on his own as well as the massive power of the fox. All that put together, and the Kamui threw us as far as it could. Oh, this was all making his head ache. That actually doesn't sound at all bad. Ratchet glanced at his computers. But still, unfortunately there isn't much solid data to go by, so I cannot promise anything grand here, but I'll try to work something out. Thank you, Ratchet, Kakashi said, feeling gratefulness rise in his chest. I really appreciate that. It is no problem, my pleasure really. Ratchet smiled. I'll do my best to have something ready soon. The white-red mech left for his computers and Kakashi was left to sit on the bed. The same hospital bed he was beginning to very much despise. Mrs. Darby had strongly insisted, some might even say threatened, for him to stay in bed for the day. But Kakashi had never been that good at listening to doctor's advice. He tugged up his left sleeve and examined the bruises. They had changed from angry red into blue and purple mess circling around his arm. There were a couple of places where the skin had broken and was still irritated and healing. You never said where you got those bruises from. Arcee's nonchalant voice came from behind him. Kakashi sighed. What was with the blue Autobot now wanting to talk with him? Not that Arcee hadn't changed, her behavior becoming much less suspicious towards him lately. But still, Kakashi hadn't anticipated for her to talk to him quite so much on her own volition. Well, Kakashi couldn't really blame her for her earlier distrust. He too would have been dubious if peculiar strangers with secrets had suddenly dropped in the middle of Konoha. Still, it didn't tell him why the robot had suddenly started gravitating to him every now and then without questioning whether he had some malicious plan he was trying to carry out. Chains tend to leave a mark after a while, he said, tugging down the sleeves so it once more hid the nasty bruises. At least they were aching less and less. He was on the road to recovery, as Mrs. Darby had rather dryly said. What a funny expression, he had thought. Arcee let out an affirming noise. It was neither a blasé nor a sympathetic sound, and it was okay with Kakashi. He was fine and would recover swiftly. There really was no reason for anyone to worry. That they have, she agreed, crossing her arms. She wasn't looking at him, instead gazing at the base. Kakashi followed her eyes and he too for a moment watched Naruto talk animatedly with Miko, Jack and Raph. He was apparently telling about some great adventure of his, going by Miko's exited. No way! And Jack's and Raph's incredulous looks. Arcee shook her head, smiling a bit. Then her eyes shifted to Kakashi. Although I must say they look much worse on you humans. Skin seems like a very uncomfortable and impractical choice of protection. Well, it has its uses. I certainly hope so, Kakashi shrugged. It might look nasty for a while, but it's usually not that bad. And it will heal, yes. Arcee was still gazing at the teenagers before sighing. Kakashi sensed that there were words about to come and waited patiently for the Autobot to voice them. It's just distressing to witness it firsthand, she said slowly. We haven't really dealt much with human injuries, fortunately. We obviously try to keep the kids out of everything truly dangerous, but they are stubborn and sometimes end up in places they have no business to be. She shook her head. Compared to us, you humans are vulnerable with all that flesh and bones. It was a harsh reminder to see your injuries and remember the same could happen to them if we're not careful. She nodded towards the teenagers who were now all laughing together. And they are just children after all, Kakashi nodded in understanding. How did you meet them in the first place? He asked out of curiosity, and in an effort to steer the conversation away from such dark themes. Arcee snorted. That's a funny one. It was really a coincidence after another coincidence. Tried to scare them off a bit, but they wouldn't have it, and they just came to befriend us, I guess, Kakashi chuckled. Sounds like a good story. It is. The Jounin watched as the teenagers busied themselves with the games they had introduced Naruto to. Soon they were all laughing and cheering and overall making terrible ruckus. He found he was smiling slightly. I understand your concern, though. It is not a nice feeling to have such great forces after someone you want to protect. Even if they were rather powerful themselves. From the corner of his lone eye he saw RC glance at him. So Megatron really is planning something? Kakashi nodded grimly. Said it to my face, actually. And he was all arrogantly confident about it. Like there was nothing I could do about it. There's always something we can do about things, RC said quietly. That's why the other team is always trying to stop us from even attempting. Oh, I know that, the Jounin said, a small smile behind his mask. I have no intention on letting anything happen to Naruto. I might have been careless in the last fight. I won't be again. And if Megatron thought he'd be easy to capture and use against Naruto, he was dead wrong. He wasn't going to get caught again, and he wouldn't give the Decepticon Lord a chance to get to Naruto through him. It would never happen. Just recover a bit before rushing into that next fight, RC muttered. I won't come and save your hide another time. I'll keep that in mind, RC-san. There was a short silence between them. Well, as silent as it could be when the kids were making all that clamoring. So, RC said, you really did have the superpowers Miko suspected you to have all along. Kakashi groaned at the term. They are really not superpowers. Kami, what had Naruto told them? To them they really are. The Autobot chuckled. Miko will soon be pestering you all the time about them. Great, Kakashi muttered. He didn't have anything against the kids, not really. They, especially Miko, could just be a bit, much sometimes, a bit too much. I hope you understand why we kept it a secret, RC-san, he said, one hand rubbing the back of his neck absently. His arm twinged at the movement, but he ignored it. Oh, I understand. I might not be happy about it, but I realize why you deemed it necessary. Her blue eyes twinkled a bit, and Kakashi couldn't figure out whether she was really annoyed or not. Just like you kept it secret that you learned English in a week, Hataki. I didn't learn all of it. Enough, I'd say. Kakashi rolled his eye. Well, yes, I did. Sorry about that. But I am a ninja. We are supposed to keep secrets. Well, it's annoying, so please refrain from it in the future, Hataki-san. Kakashi laughed. I'll do my best. It was only late in the evening when Ratchet finally called them all to the computers. The kids had been once more removed from the base, carried off by Bulkhead, who had just returned back to the base. The medic was nearly exhausted by the day's work. He had totally become absorbed with his current task, inspecting old readings and searching for data buried deep within the archives. He had nearly lost patience with the insufferable human technology, but fortunately Raphael had been there to aid him a little. Just a bit, mind you. He still wasn't sure if he had made enough progress, not just during this particular day. He had been working on this nearly the whole week, after all, with limited knowledge though, but at least he thought he had gotten somewhere. He straightened his posture as the rest of the team, along with Naruto and Kakashi, gathered around the computers. The humans were standing on the upper level, evening out the height differences a bit. Kakashi stood with his hands in his pockets, still looking a bit pale and shaky but at least standing. Naruto was leaning his elbows against the railing, looking enthusiastic and impatient. So Doc? Wheeljack asked with his usual annoying smirk. Have you reinvented the science already and found a way to pop open a door to other dimensional neighborhood? Ratchet frowned at him. Would you for once take something seriously, Wheeljack? This is my serious face, Sunshine. Quit it, you two! RC snapped, as if Ratchet too had perpetrated in Wheeljack's nonsense. Prime turned to him, delicately steering the conversation back on track. Have you found something out, Ratchet? The medic nodded. I certainly hope so. As you know, he began the long explanation. There wasn't much data to go by here. There is only one precedent, and even that isn't the best base to start solving a problem like this. I can't promise even remotely solid theories, so are you saying there's practically nothing you have gotten together? Smokescreen's obnoxious voice came up. Ratchet resisted the urge to throw something very solid at the rookie's head. What I'm saying, he said rather emphatically, is that there wasn't a beginner's guide to dimensional travel lying around anywhere where I could check the factors. He calmed himself and carried on the real explanation. Anyway, I fortunately got some facts to back me up. I spoke with Hataki-san and he confirmed the teleportation technique he possesses. He also told me his suspicions about how this all came to happen, about the other, unfamiliar force colliding with it that possibly strengthened or altered the teleportation. I am not sure what it truly caused, Kakashi said, crossing his arms. It could have made it unstable, snatching up me and Naruto and burning up our chakra and throwing us as far as it could. The Kyuubi's powers are vast after all, as well as Naruto's. Ratchet nodded at the ninja's words. And that brings us to the next fact. Apparently some of their power got lost on the way, so to speak. Naruto was nodding vigorously. The fox should have been stronger. And even Sensei doesn't usually faint that easily. Ow, Kakashi-sensei, that hurt. Ignoring their antics, Ratchet carried on now that he had just gotten on a good roll. I also checked the old data from the computers, from the day you arrived. At first I thought the energy we detected in the desert when you arrived was quite ground bridge-like. Not in focus detail, of course, but still there were some similarities. He hit the keys and brought up more data that filled the displays in long strings of text and numbers. He saw Naruto and Kakashi watching it with frowns on their faces. The data from the Shadow Zone incident is even more similar. And here's what I found out. More tapping at the keyboard and more data ran through the displays. I really hope you are going to clarify a bit, document. If you'd wait a click or two, Will Jack, you would find out I would. The Shadow Zone was breached when two ground bridges were feeding off each other at the same time, at the same coordinates. That's why the children didn't end up here when entering the portal, but rather a different plane of existence and dimension. So watch the catch? I think the power to really break our world's four-dimensional walls is greater than what two ground bridges at the same coordinates can generate, Ratchet said, which means something happened that allowed mass to pass through a shortcut of sorts into a place farther away than any enforced or double ground bridge, or space bridge on the matter, could ever reach. Kakashi was nodding slowly. I think I see what you mean, but that helps us how? I think, the medic said, that it might be a way for you to return home. Naruto blinked. What, jump into that shadow thing? Not just that. Ratchet looked at Kakashi. Could you use your teleportation skill here too? I don't see why not, Kakashi said slowly. But there's still the problem with the missing power. Even if we use the shortcut to get farther away from this dimension, I don't think even our combined chakra could be enough to reach home. That might not be such an issue, Ratchet said. I think the power didn't just disappear. I think it's still there, keeping up the connection and directing you home if you just have enough power to reach it and get a bit closer to it, to put it simply. RC was shaking her head, frowning. How can you be so sure? It would be a great risk, to just jump to Primus knows where and hope there's something there that's not just empty space. Naruto shuddered at her words, looking a bit spooked. I told you it's not anything too solid, Ratchet said, frustration creeping to his voice. It's a wobbly theory, but it's all I could think of. It makes at least some sense. It could work, Kakashi said with a distant tinge to his voice. Chakra doesn't just disappear, and I'm not sure if Kamui is supposed to be used for such great distances. You might be right. And I would probably feel if the power was there or not if I tried to get home. A pause. At least I'm rather sure, well, might be right. Was probably the closest he could get to a proper theory with the tools he currently had. It would be logical to at least some degree, he admitted. And it's the best we have right now. Okay then, Naruto said, leaning to the railing. So, in English or Japanese, what are we gonna do then? We, Ratchet said, are going to reenact the Shadow Zone. Bumblebee beeped and chirped. Be's right, Bulkhead said. How are we going to trick the cons into that? Ratchet shrugged. It's not that complicated. We'll stage some activity somewhere, have some of us stationed there. When the Decepticons fire up the bridge, I'll get the coordinates and do the same. Prime looked grim. That will demand great precision and speed. It would be a matter of seconds to get to one of the portals. I can do it, Ratchet said confidently. So can we, Naruto declared. Ninjas are faster than you can imagine. We'd get there in time. The boy probably wasn't exaggerating much, because the older ninja beside him was nodding at his words. He's right. We can do it. Just take us there when we've recovered once more and we'll be alright. RC was frowning. It still sounds terribly risky. Of course it's risky, RC-san. But we have to do it to get home. There was a solemn silence after the ninja's words. We'll make preparations then, Wheeljack said. Doc can take care of the science stuff. We can come up with a distraction. I'll be back in action in a week or so, Kakashi said. Shouldn't take longer than that. It is settled then, Prime said, his voice heavy. He turned to look at Kakashi and Naruto, who straightened their postures under the leader's gaze. Are you sure you are ready for this? You can take longer to prepare and let Ratchet do more research if you so wish. Thank you, really, Kakashi said seriously. But we will be ready. And we shouldn't linger, not when Megatron is scheming in the background, and anything could be happening back home. Optimus bowed his head. I understand. Well then, Wheeljack said, clapping his servos together. Soon we'll get some more action then. Smokescreen too seemed to be rather enthusiastic, and Naruto's eyes were gleaming. Ratchet suppressed a sigh. He was surrounded by ruffians. What a day! Naruto exclaimed as he threw himself onto the makeshift bed in the room that had become theirs. It really was a rather good bed. When carrying out long missions, you usually had to sleep in the most uncomfortable places you could imagine. Here it was warm and dry in blankets, so Naruto found nothing he could complain about. Truly, Kakashi-sensei said a bit dryly, walking to the steel table. He removed his hitite, carefully placed it on the table, and touched it with the tips of his fingers. Then he left it there and sat down cross-legged on his own bed. I thought all that science talk was going to burst my brain, Naruto complained, lying on his back on the bed with his arms and legs pointing into different directions, taking up as much space as he could. It was just so comfy. It was all rather advanced, Sensei admitted. He reached for his Jounin vest by the wall, and the kunai holster that had lied beside it. From the holster he dug out one of his remaining kunais, and the vest gave up sharpening tools. Soon the soft sound of metal being sharpened filled the room. But it's enough that we'll know what to do when the time comes. Yeah. Because you'll be doing all the work. Naruto huffed rebelliously. He'd be just tagging along, or so he felt like. Kakashi-sensei smirked behind his mask, Naruto was sure. And you'll be a great sidekick. Naruto kicked at the blankets and grumbled. There was silence for a moment, only broken by the sounds of Sensei taking care of his weapons one by one. I'm really sorry about the Kyuubi, you know, Naruto said. Kakashi sighed. I know. It wasn't your fault. You were stupid, but Kyuubi is nothing you can do much about now. Yeah. Sucks. It does. Sensei put his weapons away again and turned to face him, face all serious. The scar over the Sharingan looked particularly nasty today. I am sorry too, his teacher said, for not being careful enough, and forcing you to a situation that the Kyuubi was bound to surface in. It wasn't your fault either, Sensei. Guess you're right. Kakashi-sensei was smiling slightly behind the cloth mask if the crinkles in the corners of his eyes told anything. Maybe I was being stupid too, Naruto snickered. Yeah, probably. You know, Naruto, that I'm not that easy to take out, Sensei said, and Naruto's eyes snapped to meet his teacher's lone one. This was a weird and possibly very important conversation, he decided, and he was still lying in on the floor like a starfish. He shortly considered sitting up, but in the end didn't want to move from the comfortable position. Well, you were unconscious and lying in a puddle, he pointed out. Kakashi-sensei chuckled wearily. I probably was, he said. But our chakra levels won't take me by surprise again. The cons won't do it either. We'll both be fine. So don't worry. Sure, Sensei, Naruto said and blinked, frowning a little. A really weird conversation. What's this all about? Nothing, Naruto. The Jounin got up and went to the light switch. It's late. Get to sleep. The room fell into darkness and Naruto got under the covers. It took him a bit longer than usual to fall asleep. Weird. Chapter 18. The week passed slowly. Kakashi finally got back on his feet, the pain receding and the bruises fading. Mrs. Darby still insisted on checking on him from time to time and Kakashi agreed to this, albeit a bit reluctantly. He was well, after all, but guess one couldn't be too careful when facing a potentially dangerous travel through dimensions. Anyway, after a few days he was rapidly recovering his chakra as well as his physical health. Naruto, too, had recovered from the Kyuubi incident, and had spent most of his time with the other teenagers or varying Autobots. Kakashi could see that the boy was waiting for the 0 hour though, could see the restless energy building up in him, like it was a great force rippling under his skin, making his muscles twitch and eyes wild. However, there was also something else present in Naruto's eyes, though the teenager hadn't yet chosen to speak up about whatever was gnawing at him. Kakashi figured he would just have to wait and see if the boy would decide to bring it up. The copy Nin himself was also feeling agitated. They were, after all, about to try out something that in theory would only probably work. He voiced his doubts to Ratchet one day. I have to say this is actually more your specialty than mine, Hataki-san, the medic replied, tapping away at his computers. Sometimes the Jounin doubted if even the medic himself knew what he was doing. The readings on the screens never made any sense to the ninja. Then again, it really wasn't his area, was it? You possess the skill and the power to open doors to other dimensions, and it seems like it was mainly you who made the travel possible. We and our technology are only giving you a boost and maybe a safer route home. But what if the power, the ability isn't there? Kakashi argued. What if you're wrong? Then where would it be? And I believe you will find it as you pass through the barriers of this dimension. When outside, you will be able to grasp it, most likely. It was all much too complicated and he hated it. But Ratchet was a scientist, and probably right about this. Kakashi was the one with the technique of teleportation and the knowledge of chakra. He got them here, so he should be able to get them back home. Should. He sighed, running a hand through his hair and leaning against the metal railing on the upper level of the base. I do trust your theories, Ratchet, he said. But I still sincerely hope that you do have a plan B thought out too. Partially, yes, Ratchet said, frowning at his screens. But this theory we're about to try out is the one we have actually done before, albeit unintentionally, and in somewhat smaller scale. Therefore, I'd say it is the best choice. I see your point. How is the recuperation going? Ratchet asked then, turning to glance back at Kakashi. Have you already regained your chakra? Nearly, Kakashi replied. It always takes some time, but I'll be fine. It was still rather disturbing a thought to entertain that his chakra wouldn't recover fully. No, only about halfway through. He frowned to himself, looking down at his currently gloved hands. If all went well, he would soon have his remaining chakra in his use too. He very much looked forward to that feeling. It really is a curious thing, Ratchet muttered, as if to mostly just himself, his voice tinged with something that sounded like awe. To think that where you come from, humans harness that kind of power, Kakashi chuckled lightly. I suppose it is a weird thought here. Though even I didn't know just how far the chakra and techniques can actually reach. It was still a rather frightening notion. If it had happened once, didn't it mean it could happen twice? Could it be studied? Repeated? Harnessed? Used for not so honest actions? These all were dangerous possibilities. And once they got home, they would have to be careful about who they would let know about it. Tsunade had to be told, of course. But Kakashi knew it would be the best if as few people as possible would learn of this all. So there are quite many types of that power, I presume? The medic inquired, turning away from his computers and regarding Kakashi with an intent look. Ratchet had clearly decided it was high time to indulge his curiosity, and Kakashi couldn't really fault him. After all, no scientist ever backed off from new research and new reality-altering possibilities. Or at least not the proper ones. Yes, he said, climbing over the railing and jumping down. He landed neatly onto the base floor, softening the impact with a hint of chakra and walking to stand beside Ratchet. The sheer size of the robots never failed to surprise him, even though he had been living with them for a while already. Mostly they revolve around the elements, but there are other kinds as well. Bloodline powers or rituals. And then there's healing chakra naturally. Well, that does sound handy, Kakashi chuckled. You could say so. It must have been frustrating to be healed with, well, lesser methods then, Ratchet deduced. If you are accustomed to faster ways of recovery, well, it's not like we always have a trained medic following us around back home either, Kakashi said. But to be frank, then yes, of course. Fortunately, you seem to be doing well, even with our ways of medicine. Yes. With a bit more rest, I'll be as good as new. He still had the bruises from hanging in the chains. Bruises never faded that quickly, and his shoulders and arms were still a bit stiff. But that wasn't anything he couldn't deal with. Ratchet was shaking his head. A power to heal like that. Shame it cannot be taught and learnt. Kakashi smiled a bit under his mask. Unfortunately, you do not have chakra, so it is out of the question. But you do have your own set of skills, of course. Well, that is the way of the world. Ratchet nodded, then turning back to his computers. And although I am in no way a specialist in human health, I would advise you to rest a bit more, Hataki-san, before Mrs. Darby catches you wandering around. Kakashi sighed deeply. Back in Konoha, escaping the hospital was enough to get the doctors and nurses to leave him alone. Here, though, the hospital, unfortunately, was the same place he spent all his time anyway, so there really was no way out from the pampering. And somehow, the Mrs. Hospital would find him wherever he was anyway. I'll keep that in mind. Then again, they were going to travel through dimensions again very soon. In that light, maybe he could use a small moment of rest. Just a moment, mind you. He wandered back towards the room that had long ago become his and Naruto's. Navigating the big, quiet corridors now came easily to him. The base wasn't that hard to memorize once you set your mind to it. Very soon he heard footsteps thundering closer behind him, and he rolled his eye heavenwards. The boy is supposed to be a ninja. Then again, sneaking around in shadows had never been one of Naruto's fortes. His strengths were very much centered in the other end of the spectrum. Sensei! Naruto exclaimed, slowing down his jog and falling into a step beside Kakashi. Naruto, he replied smoothly. Where are you going, sensei? Everyone's back there. Jack suggested that we watch some movies. Classics. I still need to rest, Naruto, the Jounin replied, slightly scrunching up his nose in distaste under the mask. He rubbed his left arm slightly, where he knew a particularly big, nasty, dark bruise was only now changing color from purple to yellowish green. It kept throbbing sharply, though he was mostly able to ignore it. So, Naruto said, dragging out the vowel in a ridiculous manner. You're just going to take a nap? Kakashi rolled his eye at his student's baiting, from the corner of his eye seeing the grin on the boy's face. Resting is not necessarily the same as taking a nap, Naruto. Well, good then, because you already slept for ages, you don't need to do it even more. I doubt recovering goes like that, Naruto. Kakashi sighed. Anyway, I need to heal as much as possible. We'll be leaving soon and it would be highly embarrassing if our return failed because I ignored the doctor's orders. He, Hatake Kakashi, was actually following medical instructions. People back home would never believe it. Naruto was silent beside him. Kakashi glanced at then-teen quickly and saw him pursing his lips into a straight line, his forehead marred with a frown. What is it? At first he thought the boy wouldn't reply. Then Naruto carefully began. I don't know, sensei. Now it was Kakashi's turn to frown. Speak your mind, Naruto. It's just... The boy huffed, making an aborted movement with his hands. We're really going to leave so soon, sensei? Kakashi came to a halt in the middle of the corridor, turning to face his student. Naruto, too, stopped though he didn't turn, choosing to fold his arms and stare ahead instead. What are you saying? Kakashi asked, suspicious. What do you mean by so soon? It's just that we've been here such a short time. Naruto exclaimed. Not even 2 weeks. Do we really need to rush out so soon? Kakashi stared at his student. Naruto, he said slowly. We have found a way to return home. Considering our situation, that is a major breakthrough. Of course we are going to utilize it, but it's not like there is a time limit to it, is there? Naruto argued, now turning to face Kakashi. We could do it later as well, and it would all be fine. Of course there is a time limit to it. Kakashi responded, narrowing his eye. The plan demands that we fool the Decepticons. That is not something we can assume we can do in the future as well. We need to use the chance when we can, but a few days wouldn't hurt. We don't have to stay here forever. Just maybe a week or two and... No, Naruto! Kakashi interrupted curtly. We need to get back home, and we are going to do it now, sooner rather than later. Naruto waved his arms in exasperation. But home's not going anywhere, it might as well be. Kakashi muttered. Things are changing back home, Naruto, surely you have noticed it too. We cannot afford to be away any longer than we must. Naruto let out a sharp noise. I know, sensei. Just, we are in another world, sensei. How often does that happen? I just want to see a bit more, and even though I miss home, I don't want to say goodbye just yet. And moreover, he sent Kakashi a determined look. We'll be abandoning the Autobots here to fight with the cons, Naruto. Kakashi sighed. That is a conflict that has been going on for centuries. You cannot expect us to solve everything, but they are outnumbered. Naruto exclaimed. You didn't see the nemesis, it was massive. And it's not just their conflict anymore, they attacked us too. We're practically running away, Kakashi scowled. We are not running away. Naruto rolled his eyes, then folded his arms again and returned Kakashi's scowl with a one of his own. Of course we are. They've been on our tails since we got here, and now we're slipping out from the back door, for the last time. Kakashi said. We are not sneaking out. We are going to trick the Decepticons into opening a ground bridge, and when Ratchet does the same we will be in the middle of everything, trying to get through. We are not escaping through the back door, we're attempting to kick down the front gates. And what then, huh? Naruto demanded. Well, be leaving the Autobots there to deal with the rest of the fight? Naruto was looking at him with accusation in his azure eyes. That is not what we do, those eyes were screaming. Kakashi closed his eye for a moment, and took a deep breath. They were the ones to suggest this plan in the first place. They wouldn't have done that if it was too much for them to handle. That's not the point. Naruto countered, and his voice was rising, about to turn into a proper shout. We are ninjas. We have everything we need to fight with them. We cannot just turn our backs to them when they have helped us so much. Kakashi dragged a gloved hand over his face. The part that was visible, that is. When he lowered it he fixed Naruto a stern glare. Naruto, we might be strong in our own world, and even here, but we do not belong here. These are different enemies, ones we are not accustomed to fighting against. We have less chakra here, our foes are giants made of metal, and they do not have chakra at all. Half of my jutsus with the Sharingan will have no effect, and Kakashi forcibly cut himself off, shaking his head. He didn't know how Naruto would react if he heard Megatron knew of the Kyuubi and was planning to use it against them, undoubtedly. You are a fool, Hatake Kakashi, for thinking you can spare him from that knowledge, but Naruto, it seemed, was not to be deterred. We're doing fine, considering. And now we know even more. We could help them, Sensei. We could fight back. Kakashi thought of Konoha, and of the direction he had seen things go. It is not our fight, Naruto. And the only reason the cons are on our back is because we're here. Once we're gone, it's over. He was going to say there was nothing personal about it, but that would have been an outright lie. Personal had come into the picture when Megatron had captured him, tortured him and threatened Naruto. But there were things he wanted more than revenge. Naruto had enough enemies because of what he was back in Konoha. He didn't need any more evil maniacs on his tail because of the fox. The accusation in Naruto's eyes was cold and hard. So we are just going to leave. And what, that's that? Yes. Kakashi deadpanned. Naruto stared at him for a moment before letting out an angry snort and turning on his heels. The Jounin sighed and ran a hand through his hair. He had thought at least this part would be simple. Apparently it was not, he thought gloomily as he watched Naruto's back as the boy briskly walked away. It would need to be done. They'd have to leave, for their own sake and for the villages. Kakashi didn't know how time differences between dimensions worked, and he dreaded that when they would return to Konoha too much time would have passed and something horrible would have happened, something they could have helped to stop if they had been home when they were needed, where they were needed. This was not their world. Nor their fight. It was very foolish, yet Kakashi couldn't help but feel a nasty twist of forlorn guilt in his gut, because even though he had been a ninja for 2 decades now, a small, irrational part of him had hoped he could forever be that hero Naruto used to look up to when he was a fresh genin, a hero who always did the right thing. But right and wrong were rarely so clear in life, and suddenly such a thing was not possible anymore, and choices had to be made. Kakashi had long ago made his. He turned around and walked to their room to rest. Naruto stretched as the end credits began to trail through the screen. The movies had been nice, and the other kids had been adamant that Naruto should see them. Something about them being a series of classics. Although Naruto had been a little disappointed to learn that the humanity here hadn't really yet reached the era of space travel, as had been in the movie. Because that would have really been cool. Not that giant robots already weren't awesome. Raph, who sat on the floor on a spare cushion, said something enthusiastically, to which Jack replied with a snort and few quick words. Raph frowned and responded with an annoyed voice, and soon the boys were squabbling about something Naruto had no idea about. Even though he had been learning a bit of English, his vocabulary was more than limited, and the other boys were talking much too quickly for Naruto to even catch the words. What are they going on about? He asked Miko, who rolled her eyes. Arguing about the newer trilogy. Raph thinks it's good, but in Jack's opinion it's rubbish. There's another 3 of these? Yup. And I too think they're funny, but Jack's real snobby about them. She rolled her eyes again before adding. I say we watch the newer ones too, now that you are here. The fights are much cooler there. These ones are good, but they're so old. Naruto grinned at that, though he could feel that the smile didn't quite reach his eyes, nor ears. Sounds great, he said. For a moment he let his gaze wander around the base. Ratchet was once more working on his computers. Didn't he do anything else? Did he have any hobbies? Any free time at all? And he saw Bumblebee talking with Bulkhead further away. Although, well, I'm not sure if we'll have time for that. I mean, we're leaving soon, aren't we? He turned to look back at Miko, who was frowning at him. The girl huffed and flopped back against the sofa cushions rebelliously. That's so stupid. You only just got here, Naruto sighed. I know. But Sensei was really adamant that we leave as soon as possible. For a moment, Miko looked truly miserable. But a few days wouldn't hurt, right? That's what I thought, but Kakashi-sensei apparently thinks they would. And, well, Naruto grimaced. We do have the Decepticon leader after us, so I kinda see what he means. Miko smiled wryly. Yeah. But Megatron won't find you if you keep a low profile. You could stay for a few days longer, and we'd do something awesome, and well, then you could leave. She huffed again, letting the air sharply out. If it's that important, Naruto sighed and he too leaned against the back of the sofa, staring up at the ceiling. It was very far away. The place really was huge. The thing was that of course he too wanted to get home. He wanted to see Sakura-chan again, and tell Iruka-sensei all about their insane adventure, and assure them that he was fine, apologize if they had worried them. He wanted to get back hunting Sasuke, because who knew what that stupid idiot was going to do when Naruto wasn't there to try and get him back. And Kakashi-sensei had promised him that new training. He had much to do back home, and many people he wanted to see, and Kakashi-sensei was right. Something was happening behind the curtains, and neither of them wanted to miss that. But still, he was in another world, and what had he been doing there? Sitting in a boring base. Well, not that boring, of course, as there were giants robots there. And it was a secret base after all, so maybe he could have been sitting all this time in a much more boring base too. Still, that was not the point. And running in a forest somewhere, and well, of course there had been the quick trip to the Nemesis, but that really didn't count. He hadn't been there to admire the scenery after all. He wanted to see more. He wanted to walk down the streets of a city here, he wanted to observe the people and see how they lived their life. He wanted to try if he could drink a whole Coca-Cola without choking on the bubbles, and Kakashi-sensei insisted they leave. In a couple of days. Without seeing or doing anything. It really wasn't fair, Naruto thought gloomily, glaring at the ceiling as if it was personally responsible for his predicament. Why do you have to go, anyway? Miko grumbled. I mean, if you don't count that Megatron is after you, Naruto snorted. What, you don't think that's a reason enough? Miko shrugged. You're ninjas. I don't know if you have any more secret reasons for what you do. Kakashi-sensei is the one who takes care of being mysterious. Naruto laughed, but sobered quickly. Well, you could say there are a lot of things happening back home right now. Mostly not good things. Kakashi-sensei is right when he says we should get home soon so nothing will happen when we are away. I don't want to be away either if they need our help. And I have things I have to do too. He scrunched up his nose. I don't want anything to happen to my home while I'm away and not able to fight with them. Miko's eyes had widened. She was silent for a moment, seemingly contemplating. Naruto guessed she had never actually properly thought of what being a ninja really meant. Naruto couldn't blame her. She was a civilian after all. That's why there were ninjas and soldiers in the first place, so civilians didn't have to know. Didn't have to fight. Still, it sucks, Miko ended up saying petulantly. Then she sighed dramatically beside him. We could have done so much. We could have gone to New York. Or to the Grand Canyon. I haven't been there either. It would have been so cool to go together with everyone. What's the Grand Canyon? Well, it's a canyon. A big one. The name kinda gives it away, don't you think? Naruto made a face at her, and she laughed. And then, she continued, we could have gone racing around the desert. I'm sure Bulkhead and Wheeljack would agree, and of course Bee and Smokescreen too. A proper alien hoedown showdown speedster race, Naruto grinned. That would be great. He had spent way too little time in cars here. They'd have to remedy that, or would have remedied that, if they wouldn't leave in a few days. Why are things so rarely simple? He thought, staring once more up to the ceiling. Would it be so hard to even once find a satisfying compromise? He looked at Jack and Raph, who were somehow still in the middle of the argument. Naruto had no idea if it was still about the worth of the controversial movie trilogy, or if they had moved into some other topic. Miko shouted something in English and threw a popcorn at Jack. It hit the boy on the head and got stuck in his hair. Jack turned to yell back at Miko, furiously ruffling his hair to get the popcorn out. On the floor, Raph started to giggle. Oh man, thought Naruto as he watched another piece of popcorn hit Jack in the forehead. Would it really be such a hardship to stay even a bit longer? I say we keep it simple, Wheeljack said, lazily spinning one his katanas in his servo in wide slow arcs. RC's eyes followed the blade cut through the air with a soft swooshing sound, glinting in the harsh lights of the base over and over again. She rolled her optics at the spectacle, but remained silent about it. Let Wheeljack play with his toys for now, if it kept him occupied. Smokescreen was nodding, his optics glowing bright blue. That'd probably be a good one. The plan doesn't need to have too many moving parts to work well for us. A staged attack on an Energon mine, maybe? RC frowned. Isn't that a bit obvious? We already did that when Naruto and I sneaked to the Nemesis, Wheeljack shrugged. So what? They'll still have to react. It's not like they can just sit by and wait for us to snatch a mine from them because they suspect it might be a ruse. And we only need them to activate the ground bridge, nothing more. And if they don't activate the bridge? What if they send the flyers in first? And you think we cannot hold on our own against a couple of flyers? Smokescreen asked, affronted, as if he thought RC had been questioning his battle prowess personally. Wheeljack snorted and threw the katana in the air, snatching it perfectly back in his grasp again, making it all seem very easy and effortless. RC scoffed. Just saying it would be very embarrassing for us if they didn't use the ground bridge at all, and we'd be there in the middle of a fake attack completely for nothing. Just see, they'll use it, Wheeljack said with conviction, resuming the earlier nonsense with the blade. It's not like the cons to use only the lowest of henchmen to wipe us out. No, they'll send Knockout or Dreadwing or someone else to brag. That's what they always do. RC rolled her optics again. Sometimes it felt like that was all she ever did. Your reasoning is spotless, Wheeljack, she said with no small amount of barely veiled sarcasm, a smirk. Isn't it? He finally put the sword away in favor of crossing his arms. We only need to keep the humans out of sight, and it'll just look like a raid. It's not like they can just assume what we're going to do. The wrecker's smile turned into a grimace. And it's not like we couldn't use the Energon anyway. And the cons know that too, RC nodded grimly. So what do you suggest? You're the one who's been scouting around the Decepticon mines. I'll come up with something from my reports. A nice little mine with a good layout for us to pop in and take out the guards. Wheeljack rolled his neck. Any idea when the big day will be here? RC glanced around the place. She could see neither Kakashi nor Naruto around in the base. The kids were gone too, currently being taken home by Bumblebee. Sooner than we think, probably, she said, turning back. When Kakashi has recovered enough, I assume, and that day is not far ahead. And when we have the plan ready. She sent a look at Wheeljack. And it would be nice if the plan consisted of more steps than just pop in and take out the guards. Why? That's a plan enough for me. You're a wrecker, Wheeljack. Your idea of a plan is dubious at best. Doesn't matter if they work. Wheeljack snorted and uncrossed his arms, straightening from his slouch against the base wall. Listen, this Shadow Zone thing is handy, because all we need is for them to open the door. The rest is timing, and Ratchet can do it easily, and the ninjas told us it's no problem for them either. We'll just keep the cons off their back. Smokescreen was nodding eagerly. Their newest arrival had always been a bit too enthusiastic fighter, in RC's opinion. Wheeljack's presence was not doing that attitude any good. RC sighed. Well, you can be the one to present that plan to Prime. RC was not going to be the one subjected to that disappointed gaze. Thank you very much. With pleasure, Wheeljack said with a small mocking bow. RC watched the wrecker's back as he walked away. The big day was really approaching then, she thought. And not just approaching, it was practically knocking on the door. Knocking it down. Soon the ninjas would be gone and life in the base would return to normal. Well, as normal as their life usually was. It's strange for them to leave, isn't it? Smokescreen said suddenly, shaking his head. They haven't been here even 2 weeks, but it feels like a small eternity, doesn't it? It will be weird when they are gone. Yes, RC replied, frowning as she watched Wheeljack disappear into the corridors. It will. Chapter 19. In the end, Kakashi decided to concede. Just a little, mind you. Negotiation with the opposing forces was not something he did on a regular basis, not that Naruto really could be called an opposing force. But as the next day rolled in and Kakashi too started to realize the boredom that had oozed into their life in the last few days, boredom entangled with anticipation and a dash of anxiety. It was not a pleasant combination. For now they had nothing else to do except to wait a bit more, until Kakashi's reserves would be as big as they would get. And then there was Naruto, of course, glaring at him at all hours. It did not help, so Kakashi finally decided that maybe they could meet in the middle somewhere, and compromise a little. He offered that olive branch to Naruto. Naruto had argued that his solution was not really a compromise enough, and more like a sad excuse of a stick with thorns than a leaf branch, to which Kakashi had replied by saying that if Naruto really wanted to see this New York thing he would take what he was given, and even if the Jounin could see the teen was not fully happy with the situation, the boy still sent him a blinding smile and ran to the main hall of the base, hollering the good news to his friends. Kakashi had just shaken his head and sauntered away. The Autobots had had no problems with his idea and Ratchet had agreed to send them into some forgotten subway tunnel, whatever that was, first, and they could surface in peace from there. This would be for the best. Kakashi had though, as he had watched Naruto and Miko prattle a mile a minute, Jack and Raphael forced to stand and stare in confusion as their interpreter was too excited to pause and carry on the message. They could spend the last day here by actually doing something. Naruto would be at least a bit happier, and well, maybe Kakashi too was a little intrigued to see a proper big city here, though he would have liked to see other places too and not just in this country. But with the limited time span, what could he do? Their little trip happened on a Saturday, so the kids were free. Unfortunately, in Kakashi's opinion, so was Mrs. Darby. I am not letting the kids there with only one adult who has limited language skills and knowledge, she said sternly. In the background, Jack had looked mortified, as gray as part of his shirt. Mrs. Darby then sent him a look that held little apology, and mostly cool determination, and the boy had turned even paler. Kakashi once more decided it would do no good to argue with the woman. Mrs. Darby seemed adamant in her decision, and Kakashi had neither the time nor the energy to oppose her. She didn't like him at all, and Kakashi didn't really look forward to spending a day trip in a foreign city in her company either. He would just have to ignore her if she decided to voice her displeasure with him again. RC2 didn't take no for an answer when she announced she would be coming with them. Is it really the best idea to take a giant robot with us to a large, human-filled city? Kakashi asked her bluntly. She arched her eyebrow at him as if disappointed with his reasoning. A giant robot, maybe, she said, amusement coloring her voice. A motorbike, however? Not that strange a sight, and she transformed into the blue motorbike. Kakashi gave her an unimpressed look. And how about a motorbike without a driver? Or shall we all take turns? Something flickered in the air and an image of a helmet-wearing driver appeared on the bike. For that, Kakashi had no reply. I think that is settled then, RC said smugly as she turned once more into a robot towering above him. I believe so, Kakashi replied dryly. And so one more, robotic, soul joined to their small trip to New York. The kids were crazy with enthusiasm. Kakashi and Mrs. Darby were prepared to endure the ordeal, and RC only seemed amused by everything. And so they set off. Later that day, Kakashi was quickly beginning to regret ever accepting to this nonsense. New York was huge. It was big in a way Kakashi could not even comprehend. Insanely tall buildings reached for the sky, towering above the streets in a way that made Kakashi want to duck for cover, fearing that even the slightest of gusts could topple them over. And it seemed to continue to eternity. Subway, apparently a train going underground. Lines stretching out so far. Kakashi tried and failed to imagine how many people could be stuffed into this city, because it was, of course, full of people. The streets were filled with pedestrians running around, hundreds and hundreds of cars slowly edging forwards in never-ending traffic. After this, Konoha at night would feel like a ghost town. Although, that would probably be very pleasant, because Kakashi did not like masses of people rushing around him. And they were so rude, too, Kakashi thought, as someone bumped into him for the third time without even glancing behind, let alone apologizing. The kids, however, didn't seem to be bothered at all by the huge numbers of people around them. They oohed and ahed over everything, dashed into shops and pointed at restaurants and cafes. Mrs. Darby was following them indulgently. RC had gone off somewhere, promising to keep a low profile but staying close enough. She'd be there in a minute, she had said, if something were to happen, although Kakashi did not know what that something could be. It was not like the Decepticons were going to ambush them in the middle of a city. Kakashi would not have agreed to this if that would have been the case, and there were not many other scenarios Kakashi could think of that would demand RC's intervention. Still, the Autobot had their backs, and Kakashi had to admit it was a welcomed precaution. But the worst thing about the city was, absolutely, the smell. Smothering fumes rose from the rivers of cars, not much visible but certainly easily smelled. That, combined with the body odor and added sense of thousands of people and the smell of grease and salt from hundreds of restaurants, was enough to make Kakashi's head spin a bit and make him feel like after this, he was never going to smell anything again. The plain surgical mask over his mouth and nose was not helping much, though it would probably have been even worse without it. She had Miko to thank for the mask. The kids had bluntly informed him that he was not going to take his usual mask to the city. And why not? He had asked, a frown on his face and arms crossed. If going on the trip would demand him to leave his face bare, then it was absolutely not going to happen. You just can't, Miko had argued, waving her arms up and down as if that would make her point clearer. As soon as a police officer catches a glimpse of you, they'll arrest you. They'll think you are a robber, or a kidnapper, or a terrorist, or something even worse. Well, I am not going without it, Kakashi had said stubbornly, very much hoping he didn't sound too much like a petulant child. At least he wasn't pouting, or stomping his foot. How about a scarf? Naruto had suggested. Kakashi's frown deepened. No. Scarves are unreliable, and that would look strange and suspicious too, Miko said, delving into her red backpack. That's why I brought this. She gave him a plain white surgical mask. Kakashi stared at it before looking up at Miko. And this won't be suspicious? Nope. Everyone will think you are Japanese anyway, and it's not weird at all for us to wear that if we are sick. It won't look too strange. Kakashi looked back down to the mask. Then he said, after a moment, "Thank you, Miko." Miko beamed at him. "Of course, if you want to draw attention, I can draw something on it." The girl presented a bright purple marker with a devious grin. Kakashi sent her a totally unimpressed look. "That won't be necessary," Miko shrugged, pocketing the marker. Still, Kakashi made a mental note to keep the mask carefully guarded from the girl and her artistic tendencies. The mask wasn't as comfortable as his own mask, but it did its job, and offered additional protection against the horrible suffocating smell of the city. Though it did itch behind the ears, from a particularly hideous souvenir shop, about the 20th they had visited, by Kakashi's count, Naruto had bought a cap with "I Love New York" printed on it. His blonde hair pushed its way from under it in unruly tufts and spikes. It looked ridiculous, and Kakashi had swallowed down a snort. Naruto had picked up another similar cap, one that had looked even more uncomfortable and stupid than the one the boy was wearing, and had given Kakashi an evil grin. "If you try to put that thing on my head, I will murder you with it," he had deadpanned. "You cannot kill anyone with a cap," Miko had reasoned. "You can if you know how," Kakashi had answered, "and have enough motivation." The comment had made the girl's eyes glitter with apprehension and, mostly, fascination. In the end, the second cap hadn't made it out of the shop. Naruto had seemed a little disappointed. Miko, on the other hand, had seemed to still be considering if it really was possible to kill someone with a cap. The Jounin had half feared the girl might ask further information on the fine art of homicide by head accessories. After hours of wandering around the city, they stopped by a smallish restaurant, situated in a slightly less crowded street. Fortunately, it was not a fast food restaurant, because Kakashi would have refused to stuff that rubbish into his system again. Miko told them it was a Japanese restaurant, and to Kakashi's pleased surprise they had miso ramen on the menu. He could have wept from joy. The restaurant didn't have many tables and all the big ones were taken, so they were forced to sit on the narrow long table set against the wall, with high stools beside it. Soon they were all spread out with hot meals in front of them. Kakashi sat at the very last place, near the door. He found that the placement was rather handy as it was very hard for others to catch a glimpse of his face when he was eating. On his right, to his utter joy, sat Mrs. Darby. Guess even she wasn't foolish enough to sit in between the children. Not that Kakashi really had anything against her. No, it was more that she didn't like him very much, and even though Kakashi was well used to dealing with people who didn't like him, it was never a pleasant ordeal. Although this way, at least, he got a bit of space between himself and the teenagers. They could be tiring when there were many of them. Kakashi had a theory that their mental age dropped when they were put in large groups. Much more loud conversations and laughter at strange things occurred. And these kids didn't all even speak the same language. He turned his attention to the steaming hot ramen in front of him. It smelled heavenly. Kakashi was rather sure it would not be as they made it back home, but it would have to do. Anything was better than hamburgers and fries and that horrid black acid-like liquid. "So," Mrs. Darby started. Kakashi stifled the urge to roll his eye heavenwards. "How do you find New York so far?" she asked with forced politeness. Kakashi carefully glanced at her from the corner of his eye, but Mrs. Darby was not looking at him, but was concentrating on using the chopsticks on her rice dish. Quickly, he lowered the mask for a moment and took a few bites of his own meal. "It is very crowded," he replied smoothly. "And smells." He saw her look at him in surprise. "Smells? Yes." He tapped a finger at his nose. "Better sense of smell than most people." "Ah. I understand." They fell into silence. On the other end of the table, it sounded like Naruto and Miko were trying to teach Jack to eat with chopsticks. How could someone not know how to do that? Beside him, though, Mrs. Darby was having similar problems. "I take it you are leaving soon," she said. "We are. Tomorrow. I see." Another silence fell, even tenser than before. A boisterous laughter erupted from the other end of the table. Kakashi tried to tune everything out and concentrate on enjoying his meal. "I wish you a safe journey then," Mrs. Darby stated in a clipped tone. Her voice turned outright chilly as she continued, "Though I still won't accept the dangers you allow your student to face." Kakashi refused to look at her directly, though he still saw from the corner of his eye that she kept her eyes on her meal. Kakashi wondered if she was allowing him to eat without the fear of someone catching a glimpse of his face, or if she just didn't want to face him properly. The latter did not really fit her personality, so Kakashi, surprised, deducted it was the former. "Your opinion is noted," he said blankly. I know it probably won't matter to you at all, she said, but I will not allow myself to be silent about this. Kakashi saw her starting to turn, and immediately replaced the mask and put down his chopsticks. He turned his head minutely so he could see her face better. He made sure he could still hear the kids chattering on. He did not like being eavesdropped. Mrs. Darby's eyes were determined, not hostile but not covering anything up. That boy, she said, her voice low, is 15 years old. And none of you seem to be at all concerned about that. He went to a battlefield as if it was nothing. Naruto is not a child anymore, Kakashi said coolly, because even if the boy wasn't yet an adult, he wasn't a child either. He knew the world he lived in. Kakashi, as his teacher, was responsible for him and had to make sure he would learn properly about the world. But he would not be sheltered. That would only be counterproductive. Nor is he untrained. And he is under my protection, and you can protect him always? Mrs. Darby's voice was cutting. Because if I understood everything correctly last time he was hurt because you couldn't help him. Kakashi felt a stab of annoyance at the questioning, but also regret. He had failed Naruto, after all. If he had been more careful, the Kyuubi would not have surfaced and Naruto wouldn't have been singled out as a target by Megatron. He is not incapable himself. In fact, it won't be long until he is stronger than me. Mrs. Darby seemed frustrated. That is not even the point at all, and the point is? Kakashi turned to look her dead in the eyes. Her gaze didn't waver. The point, she hissed at him, is that he shouldn't be doing all that in the first place. No matter how talented or powerful or whatever you say he is. He is a teenager, a boy, and he should not be burdened by things like fighting and battlefields and getting wounded and dash. This must be a nice world then, Kakashi replied frigidly. If you all have such freedom to live peacefully, there are always other options than sending children to wars. If not, then you are clearly fighting for the wrong ideals. Jack told me he said he started doing those missions when he was only 12, and by that age he was no longer a small child but a trained ninja, very capable of doing low-ranked missions, Kakashi said, his low tone bordering freezing. On the other end of the table, Miko said something and the rest of the kids burst out laughing. It created nearly an absurd contrast to his current conversation. By his age I had been working for years and, oh damn it. It wasn't like him to speak more than he had planned, but this conversation had quickly turned highly unpleasant. It was even less pleasant now, Kakashi thought, as Mrs. Darby's eyes widened and after surprise were filled with something very much akin to pity when she had done the math in her head. Kakashi flexed his fingers. If there was something he could not stand, it was pity. Especially when there was nothing to be pitied. Absolutely nothing. Silence fell, this one also unpleasant but for totally different reasons. Mrs. Darby had returned to her meal. Kakashi stared down at his ramen. He no longer felt hungry. Damn that woman for ruining his appetite. He was seriously considering standing up and leaving, even if that would be a bit too much like running away. And it was not like the street would be any more peaceful. No, it would be filled with rude busy people staring down at the devices in their hands or shouting into them loudly and boisterously. And the smells were there, waiting for him. He mentally sighed. So you have... Mrs. Darby's attempt to carry on the conversation was nearly painful. You have been doing what you do for a long time, 2 decades, Kakashi said simply, poking at his food. He sighed for real this time. Such waste of good miso ramen. Mrs. Darby frowned. Kakashi could almost see the gears turning in her head. I am 29, he said, sparing her the awkward and embarrassing question. Oh, she said, clearly surprised. I thought you were older. It's the hair, Kakashi said simply. Mrs. Darby snorted at that, and the sound could have even been regarded as faintly amused. Mostly it's the mask. It is hard to see the age when you cannot see the person's face. For all I knew, you could have been hiding the wrinkles with it. To his surprise, Kakashi snorted in slight amusement. The conversation ended at that, and maybe that was a good thing so no other uncomfortable topics could be brought up, accidentally or on purpose. This talk had not ended as badly as it for a moment had seemed to be ending. However, Kakashi could feel the change in the woman's attitude right away, and he gloomily sensed when she was starting to regard her as a poor man brainwashed to be a child soldier since infancy instead of a cold-blooded bastard who couldn't care less about his student. Frankly, Kakashi would have preferred the latter. Disdain would always be better than pity. The rest of their small trip, luckily, did not contain more tense and awkward conversations. The streets were still overflowing with people, but Kakashi accepted his fate and wandered after the kids and Mrs. Darby, observing the fellow pedestrians as he went. Mrs. Darby barely looked at him, but Kakashi still felt her changed attitude leave her in waves. It made him antsy, making his fingers twitch with the suppressed need to stop her and demand that everything went back to the way it used to be. Not that it mattered what she thought of him, he thought, frowning. But still, his attention shifted to the kids. They had found a bakery store and were all glued to the window, pointing at various pastries with enthusiasm. Mrs. Darby stopped beside them and told them they couldn't possibly eat any more. After all, they had just barely stepped out from the restaurant, to which Jack replied something about the importance of a proper dessert. Mrs. Darby rolled her eyes but smiled in quiet amusement, and the group of teens ended up trooping in, Jack holding a bill he had received from his mother. Kakashi remained on the street, deciding not to add to the crowd in the tiny store. Raph was already getting squished by the others. He watched the kids through the shop window, his lips quirking slightly behind the surgical mask as they tried to make up their minds about the sweets. Naruto seemed to be pointing different pastries and asking about them, Miko translating his words to the shopkeeper. Raphael and Jack studied a larger basket with swirly bread-like snacks. There was a strange feeling unfurling somewhere around his chest, a tugging, twisting sensation which origin he failed to name. The Jounin frowned. Inside the shop, Naruto apparently said something all the others could understand, because a boisterous roar of laughter could be heard all the way to the street. The sensation intensified. Kakashi felt a sudden memory surfacing. There was a group of children sitting on a bench on the edge of the street. They held bags of candies in their hands, laughing and talking as they ate. Kakashi stared at them with confusion. "Why aren't they training?" he asked, eyes still on the two girls and the boy. One of the girls threw a candy at the boy, and he started chasing his friend around the street, while she cackled manically. He knew they were ninjas. He had seen them in the academy, all a few years older than him. Then again, almost all children in the academy were older than him. "Not everyone trains as much as we do, Kashi," his father said absently, taking long strides that forced Kakashi to walk just a bit faster to keep up. Kakashi frowned. The children were ninjas. How could they not train? He couldn't really imagine what the other kids did when they weren't at school or training. Apparently absolutely nothing, he thought with disdain as he watched the boy continue chase the girl around the street, while their friend laughed at them, nearly doubled over. He turned away from them, facing forwards as he hurried to catch up with his father. The laughter slowly faded as the distance grew. Kakashi blinked to dispel the memory, and he was once more here in New York, and not in the streets of Konoha some 20 years ago. He frowned, watching as the kids received a huge paper bag filled with pastries, laughing as they stepped out from the bakery. He felt Mrs. Darby's eyes bore into the back of his head, his neck almost smoking by the intensity of her stare. Damn that woman and her two sharp eyes. Fortunately, their little trip was coming to its end. The strange feeling inside his chest had yet to disappear, and Kakashi didn't want to give it any chance to grow even more. He just needed to get out of this place, back to the quiet base and back to business. After the great bakery visit, they slowly started to make their way to where Ratchet could safely activate the ground bridge and bring them back without anyone being any wiser. When they finally made it to the deserted old subway tunnel, they found RC there waiting for them. Kakashi had no idea how she had sneaked around while they had been in the city playing tourists. "Ready to return?" she asked, stepping away from the wall she had been leaning against. Her eyes swept over them and stopped at Naruto. "Nice hat." "Yes, we're ready," Kakashi said, ignoring Naruto's yell of "Hey!" "It's a cool hat." A moment later they were stepping out of the green vortex and back into the secret Autobot base. "Well?" Ratchet inquired as the green glow died out behind them. "How did it go?" "It was great!" Naruto shouted. "Too bad we couldn't stay longer. I bet there were loads of things we missed." "At least you already got your tourist look right," Ratchet said, his eyes amused as he regarded Naruto's I Heart New York cap. "Kakashi-sensei was a bore and didn't want one," Naruto complained. "I just have retained a sense of style, Naruto." "So everything went well?" Ratchet asked. RC nodded. "I kept an eye on them. It was all peaceful," Miko snorted. "Of course. It was a holiday after all." Then the girl smirked and let out a loud guffaw. "Expect when Kakashi nearly made a barista cry." The Jounin scowled, recalling the cafe they had visited in the morning. "She was behaving suspiciously. There was no reason for her to know my name. It was Starbucks. You're supposed to give them your name." "I'd still say it was suspicious." He tried to argue, but it was all in vain. Everyone, especially the kids, seemed to find this all very entertaining and not at all like Kakashi had been alert and made a sensible decision. Which he had done. Since it had been a crowded cafe, a total stranger, and Kakashi rolled his eyes. Absolutely no respect for the elders these days anymore. Running around New York City had left them all exhausted, so it wasn't long until Bulkhead took Mrs. Darby, Jack, Raphael, and Miko all home. Naruto too was yawning, though the boy insisted he was fine. "We will be jumping to another dimension again tomorrow," Kakashi said dryly. "It would probably be a good idea to rest properly before it." Naruto sighed dramatically but agreed, trotting away to their room. For a moment, Kakashi stood in the quiet corridor. Then he began to walk, choosing a direction at random. The base was vast, but during the last 2 weeks he had become surprisingly adept at navigating in the big hallways. He walked around the base, his footsteps practically silent against the floor. Most of the corridors looked quite the same as the others, but he still memorized them. Soon he stepped into the main room of the base. It was quiet. Most of the Autobots had disappeared too, wherever they went at night. Standby mode? He saw Bulkhead and Bumblebee talking quietly in one corner. They nodded at him when he entered, but seemed to sense his desire for a quiet walk alone as they didn't approach. He took a walk around the room, passing Ratchet's beloved computers and medical bay. Finally he found himself standing beside the couch and the TV the kids spent majority of their days at. He scowled at the video game set. Really, what was the point? It was absolutely useless to use such things. At least Kakashi couldn't understand the appeal, although Naruto apparently could. They wouldn't prepare one for anything, didn't offer any useful skills. They were machines used to kill the time people already had too little of. He remembered the ninja children, chasing each other around the street and laughing, throwing candy at each other even though they had only just paid for the same sweets. Kakashi had a sudden urge to remove his mask, still the surgical one, and run his hand over his face. It was this place, making him think stupid things. Unimportant things. Once they got back home, it would all go back to normal. Kakashi turned and returned to their room, leaving the couch and the TV behind. When he got there, Naruto was already asleep, mouth open and snoring, a bit of drool dripping from the side of his mouth. Kakashi wondered how the teenager could fall asleep so fast when they would have such a strange, dangerous day tomorrow. He put his Hittite onto the steel table, silently running a finger over the engraving on the metal plate. Soon, Chapter 20, Kakashi woke up early. He did a short morning workout, out of habit, and, after showering and dressing into his familiar ninja outfit, he stood in front of the steel table again, the Hittite gleaming on it in the dim lighting of the room. Naruto, still asleep in his sleeping bag, was facing the wall and snoring quietly. Kakashi stared at the headband on the table. It was an anchor of sorts, keeping him in place in the strong currents of the strange world around him. It was that one thing that strongly reminded him of home, of the place they were about to return to, the place they needed to return to. 2 weeks wasn't a long time, but here, in a different world, it was nothing short of eternity. So, Obito, he thought, not wanting to wake Naruto up by speaking aloud. And he didn't want his student eavesdropping on him in case the boy had gotten surprisingly good at feigning sleep. "I haven't visited you properly in a long time. You already know the reason, as I have told it to you multiple times. But soon I will be doing this in front of the memorial stone once more. It will feel good to do this properly again. For some reason, I feel like you cannot hear me from all the way here. Don't ask. I mean, it's not like your body is really buried in Konoha. But still, you loved our village, so I should believe your soul would enjoy staying around there after death too." Kakashi rolled his shoulders. He had slept surprisingly well, considering the situation, but was already feeling fidgety. "It will feel good to get some action. We have been sitting here for far too long, and now it is time to actually do something. We will fight our way out of here, and luckily our new friends will be our allies in that fight. I am nervous, Obito. I am afraid of failing. This is something no one has ever attempted before, or at least if they had, they hadn't lived to tell the tales, or had chosen to stay silent about it." He could easily picture Obito now, scowling at him and shouting that he should stop worrying, that Kakashi should just do his best and that would be enough because he believed it would be enough. "I know I should just trust myself. It isn't like this is totally new. It is a teleportation jutsu to another dimension, and I can easily do that with my Kamui. It's just a magnitude. This is a slightly bigger leap, isn't it? Anyway, I'll stop bothering you now. I will soon tell you about our final adventure here, when we get back to Konoha. I'll talk to you then. Wish us luck. Wish us all luck." He could nearly hear Obito's voice in his head, doing just that. "Thanks, Obito. See you soon." He took the Hittite from the table and put it on, carefully tilting it so it covered the Sharingan eye. Now would be a bad time to accidentally drain his reserves. It was an ordinary Sunday, so the kids should be here soon. Miko had made them swear on their lives that they would bring them to the base well before the ninjas left, and he knew the Autobots would honor that promise, like probably every promise. He wondered if Bulkhead or Bumblebee had already left for the town. He checked his pockets, making sure he had everything with his remaining weapons, the explosion tags he had prepared, as well as other equipment. Then he headed for the main area in the base. When he stepped into the large room, he first saw Ratchet, once more tapping away at his computers like that was all he ever did. He didn't see anyone else around. Where did the Autobots go during nighttime? What did they do? Kakashi wasn't sure if they needed to sleep or, what was it, recharge. Or maybe Ratchet just spent every night at those computers, doing whatever he did with them. He was just about to make his way to the medic when he heard footsteps behind him, heavy, but not as heavy as they could have been. "Good morning, RC," he said. The blue Autobot came to a halt beside him. "Morning, Hataki." "Slept well?" Kakashi's lips quirked under the mask. "How kind of you to ask, RC. It might be a little surprising, considering the situation, but I actually did sleep well." "Good then. It would be awkward if you fell asleep just when things were about to turn interesting." "I will make sure that won't happen then," he replied, amused. He glanced at RC and saw that the bot was also smiling a bit. They stepped away from the doorway and started to slowly make their way across the floor and towards the medic, who seemed to be truly engrossed with whatever work he was doing right now. "I didn't actually think this day would come so soon," RC admitted. "It seemed like a rather big problem, to find a way to get across dimensions themselves. Yet here we are, about to start our final mission. RC, are you going to miss me?" Kakashi blinked innocently as RC let out a bark of laughter. "Hardly," she answered. "I still think you are an annoying human, Hataki. But maybe you have grown on me a little during these weeks. Fighting together and saving someone from an enemy warship sometimes tends to do that," he said, amused. "But it is good to hear you have learned to at least tolerate me in the end." "Well, maybe there were valid reasons for your secrecy," she said grudgingly. "And I probably would have done the same, mostly. So I cannot really fault you for your actions." Kakashi smiled behind the mask. "There are no hard feelings, RC, so do not worry." "I don't worry about it. I wouldn't care even if there were any hard feelings," the Autobot insisted in indignation, a small huff escaping her vents. "Sure you wouldn't," she huffed again. "This is going nowhere. Anyway, I just wanted to say, before the mission starts and we will all be much too busy to have sappy conversations and goodbyes, that it has been interesting when you have been here. And I hope you a safe journey home." Kakashi stopped to face RC. The Autobot did the same. "Thank you," he said simply, with almost clear sincerity. "It will be a bumpy ride, so let's see how it goes." RC smiled wryly at him. "Now is not the time to be modest, Hataki," he rolled his eye. "Fine. With my amazing and reality-bending ninja abilities, I will take myself and my student across the worlds and universes and their boundaries with no harm to either of us." "That's more like it," RC said. "Go kick some dimension ass," Kakashi snorted. "I think cooperation would score me more points. Now where's the fun in that?" RC nodded towards the medic. "The rest will be here soon, and we will go over the plan once more. And then, well, let's roll." There were tears in Miko's eyes. "Oh no," Naruto thought, panicked. He hadn't thought there would be any crying today. Some amount of sadness, of course, because he was leaving 3 friends who he probably would not to see ever again. But he hadn't prepared for having anyone crying on him, like Miko was currently doing, having thrown her arms around his neck in a suffocating hold and sobbing against his ninja outfit. Naruto stood frozen for a moment before slowly raising his arms and wrapping them around the girl. After a moment, Miko let go, and Naruto drew in a breath that was long overdue, and took a step back, sniffling and rubbing the back of her palm over her eyes. "It's so stupid that you have to leave," she said sullenly. "Do you think cell phones work over dimensions?" "I don't know. I don't think so." "Well, they should," Miko said, folding her arms and huffing out a breath that made her bangs jump. Jack said something, but although Naruto could catch a couple of words here and there, the overall meaning was still lost to him. "Why couldn't I be like Kakashi-sensei, who learned all this stuff without even trying?" He asks how many of the bots will be coming with you. Miko passed on. "I'm not sure yet," Naruto admitted. "At least RC and Wheeljack can be. They're still arguing whether it will be more suspicious when more of them accompany us or not." A quick grin spread on his face. "It would be cool if they all came, well, except Ratchet, of course. We need him to power up the ground bridge after all." Raph had a worried frown on his face as he too said something to Miko. "And Raph tells you to be careful," Miko said, smiling. "And I'll tell you the same." No getting maimed this time, okay? I didn't get maimed the last time either. Your arm was a mess. They told us. Well, it healed. Naruto huffed. And the Khan managed to surprise me then. I won't make the same mistake twice, he declared, lifting his chin up in challenge. Miko's smile widened. If you say so. They fell silent for a moment. Naruto looked over his shoulder at the computers, where Wheeljack was currently explaining something to a dubious-looking Ratchet. Kakashi-sensei was standing on the upper level of the base, leaning against the railing and looking serious and determined and all sensei-like. They were waiting for the rest of the Autobots to appear so they could have the last briefing without setting on to the mission. It all seemed suddenly very real. They had been trying to find out a way to return for a long time, and now they were about to get back home. Home, Naruto thought. It all seemed a little distant now. When they would get back home, would this world start to seem more and more unreal? Like a dream? Would he forget everything too soon? No, he thought determinedly. This adventure was never going to leave him. It would stay with him for the rest of his life. No matter how long or short it was going to be, it was still unfair that there was no way for them to keep contact with this world. Soon they would just leave, step through the portal and never come back. There was a sudden sting in his eyes, and he had to blink rapidly to keep the sudden wave of tears at bay. He turned back to the three teenagers, well, 2.5. Raph was staring at him with shining eyes but seemed determined not to really cry. Jack didn't look quite so sorrowful, but he too seemed unhappy, his mouth a tight straight line with eyes downcast, his brow furrowed. Miko looked absolutely miserable. A roar of engines came from the entrance tunnel and the rest of the Autobot crew sped in. Soon they were all in their robot forms and walking towards where Kakashi, Ratchet, and Wheeljack were standing. Mrs. Darby had work today, so she was nowhere to be seen in the base. Pity, Naruto would have wanted to say goodbye to her too. Well, Naruto said, and Miko started to translate with a quiet voice. I guess I'll have to go now. Miko sniffed and hugged him again with no less force than the first time. Don't do anything stupid! She stepped back again, eyes shining. And kick some Khan's ass! Kakashi-sensei and Ratchet would say the two are mutually exclusive, Naruto said with a small smile. They slowly made their way to the computers and the ground bridge control. Sensei sent him a long look filled with silent understanding. Naruto came to a stop beside him and furiously rubbed a sleeve over his face. Thankfully no one commented on that. The plan was relatively simple. They would open the ground bridge into a smallish Decepticon energon mine, and wouldn't that be cool to see? Wheeljack knew the layout expertly so they wouldn't accidentally open a portal into, well, a solid stone for example. Instead, they would open it into a small alcove of rock so they wouldn't immediately be in the middle of enemies. Then the bots would go in guns blazing and Naruto and Kakashi-sensei would be on their heels, keeping out of sight. Naruto felt jittery all over, like he was about to tremble from all of the energy trapped inside him. Though the mission wouldn't demand too much from them, to Naruto's utter disappointment. The bots would do most of the fighting in Sensei, and he just had to keep a low profile and perhaps use chakra to stay out of sight and sneak after them. Of course, on the other hand, it would be counterproductive to just go throwing their chakra around when they would need it all just a moment later. The timing is essential, Ratchet was saying, his face utterly devoid of humor or amusement. The moment you see the ground bridge opening, you go for it. It will take them a moment to walk through and then to close it, but that moment won't be long. We'll manage, Kakashi-sensei said with conviction. Naruto nodded eagerly at his words. Ratchet still seemed a little dubious, but the medic hadn't seen them in action and didn't know about the great speed they could reach with chakra if they just wanted to. If you say so, Ratchet said, although he was frowning. There was a sudden silence between the 7 Autobots, the 2 ninjas and the 3 civilian kids. The air was filled with something unnamed. Prime gave them a small bow. It has been an honor to have you here, my friends. Kakashi-sensei returned the bow with a rueful smile. Of course Naruto couldn't actually see it, but he knew it from the look in his teacher's visible eye. I believe we have brought you nothing but trouble. But thank you for saving us and helping us return. RC rolled her eyes, though she too was smiling a bit. It's not yet over, Hataki. We still have the final push to do, Sensei shrugged. I believe there won't be much time to express our thanks once we're in the mine, so better to say them now. So thank you for fighting for us today. Optimus Prime seemed to smile ever so slightly. We have been fighting the Decepticons for a very long time. This is nothing we haven't done before. Ratchet was already working on the bridge. Naruto felt a strange sensation unfold in his stomach. Miko was once more throwing herself at Naruto and attempting to crush his ribs. Naruto hugged back just as fiercely. Raph stepped forward and, in Japanese, said, "Goodbye." The boy was blinking furiously, his eyes watery and shining behind the glasses. A lone teardrop made its way down his cheek. Naruto smiled and replied in English, "Bye." Jack had a deep frown on his face, but his lips twitched into a small, quick smile as Naruto exchanged similar goodbyes with him. Naruto heard a grunt and turned to see Miko hug Kakashi-sensei. The girl was clearly attempting to do the same rib-crushing hug she had given to Naruto, and Sensei's eyebrow twitched, though he still gave her hair a short ruffle. Naruto couldn't help but laugh. "The bridge is about to open," Ratchet said urgently. "You need to go through immediately. It is not like the drones on the other side won't notice it." "Right," Smokescreen said. "Let us roll," Prime said somberly. The vortex opened and the Autobots, save Ratchet, were all running through, and Naruto barely had the time to wave at Miko, Jack and Raph and shout out a quick, "Bye, safe journey." He heard Ratchet call after them when he ran into the portal and left the base behind. When Kakashi stepped out from the portal, the first thing he heard was gunfire. He immediately took in his surroundings, a cave, rather large with a high ceiling. There was a formation of rocks just to his right, so he ducked and rolled and disappeared safely behind the boulders. Just seconds after Naruto came through the bridge, the boy immediately saw Kakashi and dashed to dodge beside him. The cave got much darker a moment later when the green vortex disappeared, taking its glowing light with it. Kakashi climbed up a bit to peer over the rocks, taking a good look at the mine. It was a large cave, the rock ceiling hanging high above them. There was a wide tunnel of sorts in front of them, and the Autobots were currently in the middle of it, covering each other's backs as they swiftly and efficiently took down the surprised Decepticons. Here and there around the mine, large crystal-like formations of what could only be energons stood up from amongst the stone. "You think we could take a small rock of that with us?" Naruto whispered to him, eyes trained to the energon. Kakashi turned his head to send an unimpressed look at his student. Naruto shrugged. "What? It would have been a cool souvenir. We are not here to collect keepsakes, Naruto," Kakashi said with a clipped tone, ignoring Naruto's eye roll and returning his gaze to follow the movements of the Autobots. They had already cleared this part of the tunnel, and were advancing. "Let's go," Kakashi said, and they rushed after them, carefully keeping to the shadows. So far their surprise attack seemed to be working well. The Viacons were stronger in numbers, but they were unprepared and battling against highly skilled fighters. From the shadows cast by another large formation of sharp rocks, Kakashi watched as RC fired another blast of blue laser at one of the Viacons, hitting it squarely in the chest. The Decepticon fell heavily onto the rocky floor and did not get up. Behind the copy Nin, Naruto let out a frustrated huff. "It's stupid to lurk here while they are doing all the fighting." Kakashi didn't bother to respond. They had had that conversion enough times already. "Keep your voice down," he said instead. He took a careful look around the cave. To his relief, there were no safety cameras in sight, at least not that he could see. That made their job much easier, although he did have a feeling that job was about to get more complicated. The element of surprise would not last forever, and the reinforcements would arrive soon. Hopefully they would actually be done by then. The rocks they were hiding behind suddenly shook threateningly as a Viacon collapsed heavily against it. Small debris flew on them, and the ninjas hunkered down and swiftly covered their heads from the sharp shards of stone that rained upon them. Kakashi raised his head and dared to peek over the rocks. The bots were about to move forwards, and Kakashi caught RC's gaze as the blue Autobot's eyes swept around the mine. She didn't react much, only narrowed her eyes minutely, and then she was already moving forwards, where more gunfire and explosions could be heard. "Whoa!" Naruto said, staring at the dead Decepticon with wide eyes. Dull blue energon was already dripping from its cracked chest plate. "That was close. It would have been really embarrassing if that would have fallen on top of us. It would have been," Kakashi murmured. "Now let's go." When there was no one in sight, they dashed from behind the rocks, circling around and leaping over the dead Viacons lying on the cave floor. Bits and pieces of scrap metal and body parts dotted the cave, some still flickering sparks and smoldering. "Hurry up!" The copy Nin urged his student on, picking up his own speed as well. The bots had already disappeared behind yet another corner of the snaking mine. The sounds of laser shots ricocheted back to the two ninjas, and the bright flashes casted momentary shadows of the fight on the ragged walls. Suddenly the small female stumbled into view, motioning feverishly for them to hide and take cover. Kakashi twisted his step mid-run and tackled the blonde boy behind a large contraption, most likely used for mining purposes. Not sooner than they had hit the dark ground, a thunderous boom echoed and an air blast pressed its way through the passages, whipping up dust and small debris in its wake. What was that? Naruto coughed out, rolling to his side and sneezing slightly as the visibility cleared. Kakashi rose to one knee and glanced over his shoulder, frowning. Pressure wave, from an explosion, most likely. The younger boy gave him a furrowed look. He too rose to a crouch, hunching behind the drilling machine next to his teacher. A few running PD steps sounded and the blue bot came to view, dropping down quickly and studying the two. Are you alright? She finally asked, eyes skimming between the humans and the way she had come, blaster ready. The copy-knee nodded before arching his visible eyebrow in a silent question. RC's mouth was a thin line. One of Wheeljack's grenades. Her tone dripped with disappointment. The older ninja nodded again. Not the best course of action, I take? No. We are in a cave, after all, but that idiot doesn't seem to remember it. Kakashi snorted slightly, fully aware of the dangers of combustions in closed spaces. Still, a part of him couldn't but revel on the effectiveness of it. Besides, they were low on time anyway. Let's go! RC commanded and dashed after her comrades, the ninjas in tow. By the time they reached the rest of the Autobots, they could see the glow of the forenoon sun shining through the entrance and smell the fresh air. A warm, gentle gust of wind blew against the shinobi's faces. Time for Phase 2, Kakashi thought. He saw Prime firing one more shot at the last one of the Viacon guards at the entrance. The unfortunate Decepticon drone got a blast of laser right to its helm and collapsed to the ground and into a heap of scrap metal. They emerged from the darkness of the cave into the bright sunlight. Kakashi let his eye sweep over the vast pit-like clearing that the mine opened into, surrounded by tricky, quickly rising terrain. Wheeljack let out a short bark of laughter. So far so good, Kakashi rolled his eye. Yes, because fortunately the roof did not collapse on us even though you tried to blow it all up and down on us. Hey, it was a much-needed maneuver at the time. I can believe. RC stood beside them, eyes watchful and alert. Prime's hand rose to touch the side of his helm. Ratchet, be ready, he said. It's almost time. Kakashi met RC's eyes. The female nodded at him, a small smile on her face. Be ready. They'll try to come through any minute now, I know. Then it would be over so quickly. In seconds, actually. Kakashi felt like he was about to throw open a door, and when that door would be opened the surrounding world would disappear along with all its characters. But there were no time for many words here. No time to let his attention slip for long. Beside him, Naruto let out a shaky breath filled with pent-up energy. The seconds dragged on. Where are they? Smokescreen murmured from behind the ninjas. Shouldn't they already be here? Bumblebee let out a chirp. He's right, RC said. They are probably suspicious. It's not long ago when we last attacked a mine, and that was a ruse. Well, it's not like they can just ignore it, Smokescreen argued. For all they know, we could be right now snatching up as many Energon cubes as we could and be off with them. I didn't say that, she snapped. But it's not that surprising they don't just dash here. A silence fell then, but not because of a normal lull in the conversation. No, it was because of the distant rumble of engines that suddenly filled the skies. What? It was just seconds later, when more than a dozen flyers dived from the sky, landing on the edges of the clearing and swiftly surrounding them. The Autobots raised their weapons and fell into battle stances, forming a loose circle with Naruto and Kakashi pretty much in the middle. That was rather insulting, actually, Kakashi thought with a quick flash of exasperation. The feeling was, however, quickly run over by a wave of unease spreading across his heart. This doesn't look good. Where is that damn bridge? Naruto hissed from beside him. Kakashi shushed him with a quick movement of his gloved hand. Then there was one more flyer diving from the sky, landing on the opposite edge of the clearing, facing the Autobots. On the way it transformed into the tall gray form of the Decepticon leader. Megatron stared down at them, eyes flashing red. Well, this is a bit surprising, he said. I didn't expect you fools to try such an obvious plot twice in a week. Kakashi stared up at the Decepticon leader, his mind blank with shock. He felt Naruto grip his sleeve and the boy whispered in his ear urgently. Where the hell is that bridge, sensei? Kakashi had no answer. Without a bridge, there was no way home. From beside him he heard RC's rushed words spoken into the comlink. Ratchet, we got a big problem. Megatron was speaking again. And once it came to my knowledge that you had at least one of your new human pets with you, it was quite clear you were plotting something else than a mere raid on an Energon mine. How does he know about that? Smokescreen hissed. There is still time to end this madness of yours, Megatron. Prime demanded, taking a step forwards and facing the Decepticon Lord. This feud is between you and I, between the Decepticons and the Autobots. These humans have nothing to do with it. Leave them be. Maybe not, Megatron said silkily. But that doesn't mean they don't have their uses. There was the roar of an engine and Petey steps from the forest behind Megatron, and then Knockout emerged, shaking off dried leaves that had somehow ended up on his shoulders. I hate nature, Kakashi heard him mutter. And the blasted bugs are in my grill again. In his hand there was an object Kakashi didn't recognize, the Khan's claw-like fingers wrapped loosely around it. Optimus didn't avert his eyes from Megatron. Then you know we will stand by them. We will not let you take them again. Yes, Kakashi said, stepping forwards and joining into the conversation. He refused to stand aside when his fate was being discussed. You might have gotten us unguarded the first time. He narrowed his eye. I assure that will not be the case now. We are not some ordinary humans you can just swat aside. Yes, Megatron said dismissively. That became quite clear when you wiped out whole groups of my flyers. The red eyes flashed menacingly. But do not delude yourself, pest. Emerging victorious against mere drones does not mean you could survive against any Decepticon of higher rank. The flyers glanced at each other nervously. Kakashi snorted. You can keep telling yourself that. But I still don't see you coming down here and trying. I do not need to, Megatron said. The Decepticon leader turned his head minutely towards Knockout. Doctor, if you please. With pleasure, my liege, the red Decepticon purred. And then he was doing something with the small device in his hand. It almost looked like a detonator of sorts. Explosives? Kakashi narrowed his eye. Or he would have, if there hadn't been a thump inside him, as if something had just hit him in the chest with a sledgehammer, straight through his lungs and spine and solar plexus. Then there was a flaring, roaring pain in his veins that was burning him from within. The world blurred. Naruto saw it all as in slow motion. There was Megatron, staring down at them from the edge of the pit-like clearing, taunting them with his gaze and smirk. Naruto squeezed his hands into tight fists as he stared up at the Decepticon leader with boiling hatred rolling in waves inside him. That monster had dared to capture his mentor, to torture him, and now he had the gall to taunt him. But Sensei wasn't low on chakra anymore, wasn't unconscious, and this time, they weren't outnumbered. There was Sensei, stepping up and taunting back. Naruto saw his fingers flex as he prepared for a fight that would surely soon break out. And now they would give the best they got. And the Khans would be sorry. And then the red Decepticon standing beside Megatron did something, and Sensei collapsed, dropped to the ground as if he was a puppet and someone had just cut his strings. He didn't get up. Naruto stood there feeling like his mind had somehow disconnected from his body. Immediately, he fell into that silent world of chakra signals. It was so easy here, this world so deserted, and it was really no work at all to find that right chakra signal, because it was the only one around, or it should have been there. But now, that signal too was gone, flaring down into nothingness, and it had all happened before his eyes in no less than 5 seconds, and the Decepticons had done practically nothing. He had done nothing. He took a shaky step forwards, then another, until he was staring down at his teacher. Kakashi-sensei was lying on his front on the cold ground, his head turned to the side. His eye was closed. He wasn't moving. Wind ruffled his hair, a couple of strands of silver swaying in the breeze. Suddenly Arcee was there by his side, her hands hovering uncertainly over the still form lying on the ground. She was saying something. He didn't know what, and he didn't care. It wouldn't make any difference anyway. Naruto walked forwards, stepping over his fallen mentor in one smooth stride, kept on going until he alone was facing the Decepticons, the Autobots mere shadows behind him. There were heavy thumps shaking the ground, and 3 of the flyers jumped down to the clearing. Naruto looked past them, ignoring them and up to the eyes of the Decepticon warlord. Megatron looked down at him with disdain and triumph in his gaze, and a victorious smirk grew on his face. After that, Naruto didn't feel much of anything anymore, only rage.